Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the Major, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Major?
It's ship shape, son.
Just a random question for you. What do you have behind your sunglasses? Can you just tell the audience here today?
Nothing.
No eyes.
No eyes.
Just a soulless void of doom.
Just blankness. Always happy to see a young man raring to go, though.
Oh, yeah. I know you're not talking about me. Because I'm old.
I see.
I'm not a young man anymore, Matt. I would last 45 minutes in this walk.
Yeah, I would probably. I went to the zoo with my kids this weekend, and I would have been shot if I were being scored.
That's
based
what
on
this book loves to do for you. Is just every time you're out walking for the rest of your life, you're just going to be thinking, would I be shot right now? And the answer is almost always going to be yes.
Yeah. It makes you feel very inadequate. It's just a new thing to always be aware that you're doing badly.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Literature can do that for you.
This week on the show, the kids are still walking as we cover chapters 3 through 6 of Richard Bachman's The Long Walk. The walk continues as the sun sets and the boys start to realize the reality of their situation, which, Matt, I think we can safely say at this point, bad.
Yeah, from bad to worse.
What did you think of this week's chapters?
I loved it. Really interesting sort of writing style that kind of started to seep in this week's reading, especially. I guess it was it was kind of present last week as well, but it became really vivid this week.
Sure.
And I think we're going to talk about that quite a bit. There's a lot going on here. I'll also say, we've been getting what I would consider to be an unusual number of emails and comments and so forth along the lines of oh, I'm so glad you guys are covering The Long Walk. I love The Long Walk so much. And let me tell you, I get it. We haven't finished yet, obviously, but I apparently this is a more well-loved book than I realized, and I can totally see why.
It kind of surprises me, in the introduction we talked about last week, not the one that you read, I think the one that was in the original edition of the Bachman books. King talks about how the best one of these stories is clearly Roadwork, which I know is a book that you haven't read, but every time I read that, I'm like, seriously, man, your best one is definitely The Long Walk. I wonder what it is about the story that just he doesn't clearly see it as the best one of these, because I think it's just fantastic. It's one of those things that just make you sit back and look at this and go, you were in college when you wrote this? You were in college? Yeah.
There's a sure-handedness to this that is. I just would have been, if you had asked me beforehand, before I knew much about King, when did he write this in his career? I would have been the sort of certainty with which he approaches the prose and the psychology and the subject matter could only really be executed by an older and experienced man. That would be wrong, but it's amazing. I love it.
It is amazing. And it's really interesting to kind of frame this in comparison to Salem's Lot, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a book we both really enjoyed, but I think it is a book that I felt like, and I think you agreed, felt like it was coming from a writer that was still, kind of trying to figure themselves out and figure stuff out. It had the hallmarks of a early in his career writer. And this was written before that, and yet feels like it has none of that, at least to me so far.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Salem's Lot was him reaching and stretching himself to do something that was kind of a natural for him, doing a very stylistic thing, whereas this, maybe this sounds a bit pretentious, but this feels like it was from the heart. This is from some deep place. And these are kind of ideas and themes that I feel like he returns to forever. So maybe this is just more sort of authentic and central for him.
No, I think that's a good point. I like that. All right, you ready to get into it?
Yes.
Let's begin with our first chapter, chapter 3. And this chapter begins with a rainstorm, which is one of those wonderful things that the kids probably didn't think about when they were signing up for the walk. I think this is actually something that King does really, really well in these sections, actually, is we're constantly like being witness to things that of course would happen anytime you're talking about spending a long amount of time doing physical activity outside, rain, diarrhea, steep grade hills, you trip and fall, and it's a cut that 9 times out of 10 would be nothing, but this one particular time it just gashes big enough to where it's not going to close on its own. All these things that anyone would have to deal with, but probably not things that like a young 16-year-old boy, when they're considering doing this, would actually think about when signing their life away. I don't know. I love that we kind of focus and highlight these different things here.
Yeah. It's so many of these little mundane things where, as you say, as a 16-year-old, I certainly would never have imagined these specific concrete things, or imagined how bad they would be. It's just like the mere idea of walking with wet shoes.
Yeah.
Is like a nightmare, right? And it's like, did you think about that in advance? Is there anything you could do to avoid getting letting the water get into your shoes if it rains? This is the kind of thing where if you did think about it in advance, that would be a huge boon, actually. But you're probably not going to, or at least you're not going to think about all of the things like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because this is a world in which, we know there's a rule book, we know there's a hint book, references are made to the hints, although I continue to love how King doesn't really ever lay out, we just get every once in a while, remember hint number 6 or something. We haven't seen the full breadth of what they are or where it comes from or anything like that. So there's stuff that one could do to prepare. But yeah, I think the lack of preparedness is just so wonderfully young and juvenile, with these kids, signing their life away, not really understanding what that means.
Speaking of young and juvenile, just the fact that they're called hints is so interesting because it's such like a childish word. It's such a almost cutesy word to apply to something that's this life and death and dire. They're not rules, they're not precepts, they're not guidelines, they're hints. It's almost it almost causes you to think of it as like a fun little weekend Boy Scout activity when it's actually this nightmare.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. You'd get a hint guide for the video game you're playing or something.
Yeah, right.
I like that. So we're continuing to track this interesting relationship that Garrity has with the character Stebbins here. We see that, for the first time during this rainstorm, Stebbins is hunched over and Ray thinks the kid might be in trouble, that maybe he has a stomach ache or something else is wrong with him. And he finds himself nervous about him. Turns out, Matt, that Stebbins was just hunching over to protect his last sandwich from getting wet. But this idea is really interesting that this is the kid that, he kind of built up to be the villain at the very beginning, that he saw this kid and just decided, this is going to be the first one to get out, and I hope he does. And then now we've kind of transitioned to him wanting him to stay in. And this week, really, we'll get into a little bit more later, but this week is really where we start really complicating and adding to the idea of who this person is, who Stebbins is.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot going on this week with this idea, maybe even a theme of natural human empathy, and how, as we'll see, even in this terrible situation, these kids really can't bring themselves to wish ill upon each other, even though all the other boys have to die for each of, for a given one of them to live.
Yeah.
It's really, I think this is particularly interesting because, the idea is that Bachman is King's pessimistic persona, and it's like, I don't really see this as pessimistic. It's not pessimistic about human nature, because the idea is that these boys can't help but love and take care of each other, even in a situation where it's literally a battle royale death match where only one person can survive. The pessimistic take would be if the boys are trying to sabotage and undercut each other at every turn, and there's not zero of that happening, but there's very little of that happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, kind of going back to the metaphor you talked about last week, which was the idea that this is metaphorically showing the idea of signing up for the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, you are kind of reliant on the people around you, and so the close bond that people in the military form is kind of supported by the system because that allows you maximal chance of survival, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is not like that, right? This is different. This is actually maximal chance of survival should be screwing over as many people as possible, but also not quite, right? Because there's still like characters in this week's reading survive because they are assisted and helped out by other characters. And so it is this, you're right, this kind of intrinsically opposing things that they should be screwing each other over. They should be not trying to help each other out as much as possible. They should be treating each other like dirt, and yet they're bonding. They're forming relationships. They're helping each other. All these things, all these natural human things. Like I think this is such a great viewpoint that you're having here, because like you could if you look at the long walk as representative of the state and the state's trying to influence and control its populace, then so far their walk has in every way possible pushed against it a little bit here.
Yeah. I mean, and further, I think each of these characters sort of exemplifies a certain perspective on human nature, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to necessarily lay it all out up front, because I honestly don't think I don't think we're far enough into the story to know exactly what it is, but I
Sure.
will say, like, and now at the crux, I'm blanking on the names of the characters. Barkovich is like the guy who is going to try to stab people in the back.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see like who falls off in what order, because it's like, McVree's is this other, is like the human element, if you will, like he can't help but be humane against his better judgment, possibly. Stebbins is trying to be aloof and not, he's not going to try to sabotage anybody, but he's also not going to form any connections. And like these are all just sort of different approaches to take to how to kind of do the mind game, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of who wins or who makes it the furthest, at least, because I think that might be like the book making a statement about which one of these philosophies is I don't know, correct.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's an important thing to track, because we do, we have to assume that many, if not all of these characters are going to die by the end of the story. And right. So it is telling, if you're right, and we're using each of these characters to frame a different aspect of humanity, than seeing which of those is more successful than the other seems to be important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's actually a great transition to something else I wanted to talk to you about, because there's a thing that happens here that I'm going to talk about it as if it was some broad shared realization or something, but it could just be a thing that specifically happens to me. It's a thing that happens, about this point in the book, and it's here that for me that it happens in chapter 3, where you start this book and you're kind of overwhelmed with an introduction of characters. There are, or were, 100 boys here doing this walk, and while not all of those rather are people that we actually get to meet, we do get to know a whole lot of them, and it's just a whole mess of names that can be kind of overwhelming. And there's a thing that happens in this chapter for me, and it's one of my favorite things about reading books, is where you kind of just start to settle into the book a little bit. And what I mean by that, what that usually means for me, is that I finally have enough like emotional and character level, factual plot information to attach emotion to these names that were being thrown at, and they actually start to become people. It's the point in the book where you stop having to consciously go, wait, which one is that? He was the one that did okay. And you like, you have enough background information, you have enough emotional attachment, your brain has formed connections that you can just suddenly start going, oh, Olsen becomes Olsen, McVrees, Barkovich, Stebbins, etc. You know, it's just this thing that I think happens when you read. And it was in chapter 3 that I really noticed it this time happening for me, where I was like, oh, I know these people now.
Totally. Yeah. I totally agree. I don't think this is unique to you. I think this is the way it works, and I think this is a fantastic example of the technique being executed really well. And I'm glad you brought this specific thing up, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about how the prose of this book is striking me. And I was trying to find the right word for it, and I don't know that I can. But some attempts to find the right word would be like, it's impressionistic, it's naturalistic, it's something like King is transcribing the stream of consciousness of Ray from moment to moment as these events occur, and the perceptions and thoughts that occur to him, they appear, they pass away like clouds in the sky. The other boys swim into view and gradually, slowly clarify as their characterization solidifies in tiny, tiny little increments, word choices, descriptive choices, and they solidify over time. And it gives us this really amazing sense of identifying with and, you know, being Ray, the protagonist, and getting to know these other boys, because this is how friendships are built, like in real life. Like you meet a person and they're just like, it's a person. There's a person sitting next to me in this classroom or whatever it is. I don't even know their name. I don't care really fundamentally. And then you sit next to them again the next day and the next day, and you begin to notice things, and maybe you share a moment of humor, and then 6 months later you're best friends, right? Like that's and I mean, obviously this is hyper accelerated because of the urgency of the situation, but like there's just something about the prose itself that's really like pulling us in and making us feel like we're also getting to know these kids in the same way that the protagonist is. Really enjoying it.
Yeah, no, you're so right. This is great. I think the listeners might be shocked to hear this, but I'm kind of a quiet person. In new situations, like if I were to walk into a room with 99 other men there, you know, I probably wouldn't be the one that's going to get to the front of the room and start like talking, getting to know everyone. I'm a very kind of removed, like quiet person at first, and then you know, I pass a threshold where I feel comfortable enough with the people around me that I just open up and I never shut up, and then everyone's annoyed by me. But I think this kind of perfectly captures that general feeling, right? The idea of, you know, you walk into something, a new experience, there's a bunch of people there you don't know, everyone's kind of standoffish and quiet, and you know, you do kind of nervous chit chatting. But yeah, as you transition, as that comfort level with the people around you transitions, you start to open up more, and those bonds. So this thing I'm describing of general, you know, book feeling is true to life and is perfectly captured here. I love this.
Yeah, I think that's why I reach for the word naturalistic, because it also feels so authentic to, you know, especially for the age. Like I was so often reminded of Boy Scouts and like hanging out with other boys. Maybe you don't know them very well yet. Maybe you know them pretty well. Maybe you're just meeting them for the first time. Like it's just, I was literally having like snatches of memory surface that I haven't thought about in decades because of the way this book is speaking to that specific experience.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And now I'm thinking about all these moments in my past where I had this exact very experience. And of course, it's all has this giant shadow looming over it, right? But it is, I do think it says something that in spite of the race, in spite of the stakes, in spite of all the stuff, these things carry on. People continue to be people, no matter what.
Yep.
All right. I really liked this part here, as Ray is still kind of pondering. And that's a lot of this book, right? Is it, you mentioned stream of consciousness. It's just Ray sitting there walking, kind of thinking about his life. And we see this lots of steps, long way to go. He found himself still with too many questions and not enough answers. The whole walk seemed like nothing but one looming question mark. He told himself that a thing like this must have some deep meaning. Surely it was so. A thing like this must provide an answer to every question. It was just a matter of keeping your foot on the throttle. I love this as like another kind of very young representative of this thing. This horrible thing is happening to me. I'm dead. Like the 99% chance of this ending in my death, but it has to mean something. It has to be important for some reason. Like there has to be, it's like a very young outlook on life that sometimes these big things must mean something, even if they don't necessarily mean anything. And that's kind of, I don't know. I get the feeling here he kind of knows already that it doesn't. There's no deeper meaning here. There's nothing more profound here than just torture and abuse and control and power.
Yeah. I agree. I'm glad you pulled that out. I really love that. I mean, I love that you made it general, or that you interpreted it in a general way. And I don't want to say like, well, what King is actually talking about is the Vietnam War. Although part of me wants to make that comparison because I think at the time and afterward, it was really hard for a lot of people to confront the idea that not only was this like one of the worst wars in American history, but it was like pointless. Like that's the part that is like, you can accept a horrible, costly war if it was for a reason, but if it's pointless, if it's meaningless, there's something so existentially empty and dreadful about that. So yeah, I mean, do I think that King has Vietnam in his mind when he's writing this? I honestly do. Do I think that he's talking about more than just the Vietnam War? Yes, I think he is talking about more. I think he's talking about the phenomenon of these sorts of things in life that seem like there's got to be more to it, and it's like there's actually not. there's just not.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It reminds me of what King says about that this is Richard Bachman, but it's also a version of himself, a younger version, an angry version, a horny version, or sex crazed, I think is what he says. And we'll see that a little bit more later. But this strikes a young man who's angry at the world and doesn't understand. And I think Vietnam being kind of the center totem of that anger makes a lot of sense. So the walk continues on with kid number 100, Zuck, getting his ticket after receiving his final warning and taking off in a sprint. I think this was the one that sliced his leg open and was just bleeding profusely for 45 minutes until he finally just got so tired and then takes off running, and that's not good enough. There's nowhere you can run. Awful. Just awful.
Yeah. Poor Zuck with so many friends. Who could imagine how this could have happened?
Yeah.
That's a stupid Facebook joke, by the way.
No, it's a social network joke.
Yeah, that's true. That's a social network promo poster joke.
I also just wanted to read this because it's so gross. At about 4:45, Garrity had supper: a tube of processed tuna fish, a few snappy crackers with cheese spread, and a lot of water.
Yum.
Honestly, like the first time, and I want to apologize, like I'm probably going to be talking about the marathon and marathon training in every single episode of this particular book, and just because it's the thing in my life that so closely correlates and relates to this. But like when they mentioned like processed food stuff, I immediately thought of like the energy gummies and stuff you get for long walks. Like there's a company called Goo that makes the stuff that's just like energy crap that you eat whenever you're running for more than an hour. You're supposed to ingest something to keep your energy levels up, and that's what I assumed it was. And it's always wonderful to be reminded. It's like, no, it's like just gross, like processed rations that you eat on the road. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, definitely he could have gone with anything, and he went with like a tube of processed tuna fish.
Yeah, literally the most disgusting thing you can imagine eating while exercising ever.
Because like I like tuna,
I
as
do too.
much as anybody. But the idea of like a warm, like lukewarm, body temperature warm tube of tuna fish while you're sweaty, and then there's nothing to like wash it out of your mouth with. I mean, I guess you can drink water, but like, yeah, it's
Yeah. I'm just imagining, like the Starkist makes like those to go tuna things.
they do.
And I'm just
That's
imagining
real.
taking that pouch and just like shoving it into your mouth. Oh.
Yeah.
So the kids continue to chat as they walk, and the conversation goes to the prize with a capital P. We're not told what the prize is, Matt, but we are told it is something distinct from money. The winning kid here will win money, but they will also win the capital P prize. And I just wanted your guess or your analysis on what you think the prize is.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'll go ahead and take a swing, even though I'm not very confident. I mean, so it seems like money might be a part of it, because people keep making references to the idea of like you don't have to worry about money anymore if you win. But like, there's lots of reasons why you might not have to worry about money. Like, it might be that you're just taken care of in some other way that doesn't involve a direct cash payment. I sort of joked last week that they get sent to the island, which in my mind was a reference to the film The Island, except I later realized that movie has nothing to do with the idea that I was gesturing at. So who knows what I was trying to say?
It's the opposite of that.
It's the opposite. The
You
island
can't leave the island.
You can't leave the island because it's science fiction conceit. And there is a lot in this book that reminds me of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. So I can't help but think that the reward for winning the long walk is that they shoot you in the head and then tell you that you've been given, a lovely retirement and, a harem or something that would appeal to a 16-year-old boy, whatever. Cause like, I guess the reason I say, like, part of the reason I say that is like, it's really hard for me to imagine that like one of these characters that we're getting to know here is going to win a giant sum of money and then they're going to like happily retire and just live their life. Like they'll be broken. Like they'll be, I can say that with confidence. If anybody survives this, they're going to be mentally broken by it. And like one way or another, it won't matter that they won money, Yeah. So, I don't know. Do I really think that they just killed them? Like, it seems like people would know about that because they'd be like, I noticed that all of the long walk winners are just completely incommunicado. So I don't know that I really want to predict that formally, just because it doesn't quite make sense. But I feel like it's something in that direction. I know I'm being real wishy-washy here, but like, I think the fact is we're just not getting a lot of information.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting choice, right? Because there is a version of the story in which they just tell you what the prize is, or the prize is just money. And it does seem really interesting that they have taken the time. King has taken the time here to specifically carve out the monetary prize that one would win and the capital P prize, to the point where you wonder if like, do the kids even know? Like you're gonna get a bunch of money and you also get the prize.
Yeah.
And
it's what's behind door number 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I don't know. It is really interesting though that it seems to be something, because like what else could it be, right? Like in at least in the world we live in, like if you got gobs and gobs and gobs of money, like what else what else would you want?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying really hard to think about like what would be the thematically appropriate answer to that question. Like something to do with your relationship with the state and power and safety. Yeah. But that's pretty vague. So
yeah, now maybe we'll find out.
Yeah. All right.
So the conversation itself moves to start talking about money specifically, and we see that our boy Garrity has a very specific thing to say about money. He argues here, money isn't all that important. It says, "Oh, comfort shit," Garrity said. "If one of these goons riding that overgrown Tonka toy over there shot you, no doctor in the world could revive you with transfusion of 20s and 50s. I ain't dead," Baker said softly. "Yeah, but you could be. Suddenly it was very important to Garrity that he put this across. What if you won? What if you spent the next 6 weeks planning what you were going to do with the cash? Never mind the prize, just the cash. And what if the first time you went out to buy something, you got flattened by a taxi cab? So let's talk about Garrity's view of money and kind of the other kids' view of money, and how this kind of reflects perhaps what some of the themes King is doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Garrity has a very carpe diem attitude. Like, you could die tomorrow. Your dad could get taken by the squads at any point.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point in saving for the future because, you just got to put one foot in front of the other because it could all end at any moment. I think in a way, it's a perfect examination of how like this state-sanctioned terrorism campaign that is the Long Walk has worn down the people in this society to the point that they have all become fatalistic. They don't
Mm-hmm.
think about the future. They don't hope for something better. And Garrity is sort of a perfect creation of the society.
Mm.
Do you have a different take on that? Oh.
No, I like that. I think it's really interesting. One of the arguments that is made to Garrity is like he's here talking about how money doesn't matter. It's not important. Everything would be better if we just stopped like focusing so much on the future and how much we have, and the argument that is told to him in that is like, well, that's easy to say when you have food on your table, right? Like, and the idea of like, yeah, but it's a lot nicer to be in comfort while we're here. To which he says, yeah, true, but it's not. It doesn't matter. I think to me it reflects kind of an idea of Garrity's view on power, which it's really interesting because like in our world, money certainly does equal power, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a lot of money in the world we live in, you kind of inherently are very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Not ultimately powerful, but still very, very powerful. And it seems like at least the hints and little bits of information we're getting about this world that money in this world doesn't necessarily convey power in the same way, or at least from Garrity's viewpoint. Like, you could be a completely rich man and you're still powerless to do anything to stop anything that's happening to you. Like, you're going to die. Nothing can save you from that. It's carpe diem, as you said.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me.
Maybe like specifically the state has all the power. And so,
mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe this is total conjecture, but maybe his father was a relatively wealthy man and, he said the wrong thing and he got taken by the squads. And that was just a lesson to Garrity about how, you can have all the money in the world. You can have all the comfort you want. It doesn't mean anything because of the way this world is. I think it's interesting because I feel like Garrity's motives and motivations are the least clear out of all these boys, despite the fact that we're in his mind. I just think that's fascinating. And I think it's intentional. Like, it's not like King is failing to convey his motives. It's like, no, there's something interesting and weird going on here. At around this point, the idea, the character of Katniss, the protagonist of the Hunger Games, came into my mind for obvious reasons. That a similar sort of, death race type dystopia, just like our discussion question was about from last week. And it's like there are interesting similarities and differences because Garrity did volunteer as tribute, and you could even argue maybe he did it at least in part to spare his family some suffering, which is what Katniss did.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem very central to his mindset. Like, he's not thinking about his mom. He's not thinking like, well, at least mom will have a break from. He's not thinking about her at all, like zero. He's not, to the degree he thinks about his girlfriend. It's not like I'm doing this for her. It's like that's just a totally separate part of his life, and so it just feels so disconnected. So that's, I guess that's where it's different. Is like Katniss had like a YA protagonist type motivation, whereas Garrity's motivation is just blank as far as I can tell.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that I love about him is I don't think he knows. I don't think he knows why he's here. And so it's not as if the book is like hiding this information from us, that Garrity is specifically hiding from us, the reader. I just don't think he has a good answer. We've seen that a couple times where he's wondering himself, what am I doing here? What is this for? Why am I here? And he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's you know, there doesn't seem to be any misconception that he's likely to win, right? Like maybe he came into this saying, yeah, I mean, I could win this thing. But it seems like he felt like, I think he says specifically to his mom that like no matter which way this turns out, it'll be better this way. And we don't really understand the why of that, right? Like I think it's clear if he wins why it would be better. He can get a whole bunch of money and some random prize, but why would it be better for everyone if he were to die and lose? Is he just being like uh just kind of super pessimistic and negative, and it's like, well, the world would be better if I was just dead, or I'm so miserable that maybe it's just better that I go. We don't know, but it is interesting that this is very, very unclear still.
Yeah, I agree that there is a mystery there, and I guess it's like, you know, if the book ends without that being quote unquote resolved, am I going to feel annoyed? I don't think I necessarily would, but I'm like really hungry for the answer to that, or some clarity, right? Because it's like, what do you mean the answer? Because like you just said, he doesn't even know, and it's like, well, I want there to be some kind of moment where he figures it out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I kind of want, and whether I'm
Yeah,
going to get that or not, you know, I
sure.
don't know.
Yeah. I do also love this moment. We kind of already talked about this, but this moment where Olsen drops his food belt, and our wonderful boy Garrity gives him some food of his. We see nobody else here makes a move to help or grab it as they walk by, just Garrity. And this is where we introduce that idea of, you know, the musketeers, right? This idea of the kind of contradiction of helping those around you, because the longer everyone around you stays alive, the longer you have to keep walking. And so
Yeah,
there is some contradiction there. And yet.
right. Yeah, it's, you know, Garrity almost involuntarily acting out of humane concern for his fellow man. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I love this quote here. 4 gone, Garrity thought. 8.5 hours on the road, and only 4 gone. There was a small pinched feeling in his stomach. I'll never outlast all of them, he thought. Not all of them. But, on the other hand, why not? Someone had to. That's just, it's just incredible logic. It's just
Yeah,
incredible.
I agree with that logic.
Do you?
I mean, he's not wrong that it could be
I mean,
him.
he's right, but it's the kind of thing that, like, I think this is perfect logic because it's absolutely the type of thing that I've said to myself before whenever, like, I'm going to go gamble, or I'm going to play the lottery, or, you know,
Uh-huh.
somebody's got to win. So, I mean, by definition, or like you're following your sports team and the odds are against them in these playoffs, but you know, someone's got to win. These two teams are going to come together and one of them's going to win. Why not my team? And it's like, yeah, okay, but also
Uh-huh.
probably
Yeah.
not. Like if you frame the long walk, instead of 100 boys walk on a road until there's only one left, if you frame it as, I'm going to have a revolver with 100 chambers in it, and 99 chambers have bullets, and one chamber is empty, please pick it up and point it at your head and pull the trigger. Like, would you be like, I mean, somebody's got to win?
Yeah. I mean, what it is it's a cope, right? It's
Yeah.
I guess that's another interesting thing about Garrity is this is like the only time that he really kind of indulges in coping type
Mm-hmm.
kind of behavior. Just to make an association, I mean, imagine Jack Torrance going on the long walk. Like the entire book would be him telling himself a story about how fucking good he is at walking,
Yeah.
and he's just the best at walking, and he's totally gonna win. And he would probably be like the 14th person to die, but he'd be telling himself this story the whole time. Whereas Garrity, he doesn't do that at all. He's just like, yeah, whatever happens, I guess. Yeah, I guess somebody's gonna win. Might be me. I don't know. It's a remarkable lack of cope, actually. I mean, I agree with you that we can make fun of him for this sort of ridiculous logic, but like the degree to which he doesn't really seem to think about the idea of winning is interesting.
Yeah. I don't even want to make fun of him. I just think it's just an incredibly relatable
Yeah, yeah,
rationale for why you're doing something that has incredibly low odds of success. Like I've done this myself before
sure.
too. How people go like, the odds of you actually getting that are so small, and then you say to yourself, yeah, but
Yeah,
someone's gotta.
yeah.
So why not me?
On a long enough timeline,
Yeah.
if I play the lottery enough times, gotta win eventually, right?
Yeah, I had for a long time. I said I'm never going to play the lottery because the first time I play the lottery will be the time I'm going to win. So I got to wait for it. I got to wait for the moment, and
Uh-huh.
I'm still waiting, Matt. We'll see.
Okay, well, good.
It's gonna happen.
But then, when you win, will you feel like, oh, damn it, I should have played earlier?
I don't think so. I don't think whoever won the lottery is gonna say that.
But what if the metaphysics really works that way, where just whatever the first time that you play the lottery is, you'll win?
Oh yeah.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
It doesn't. But and yet here we are, me
Yeah.
patiently waiting for the $1 billion jackpot.
Yeah, me too, man.
So another kid gets it as they head closer to town, and the sun begins to set. And Matt, finally, I'm so happy about this. It's time for the triumphant return of Jehubis.
Yes, finally. It's been how many books since we had an occurrence of Jehubis?
It's been quite a few. So the line here is, they passed a group of cheering teenagers sitting on a blanket and drinking Cokes. They recognized Garrity and gave him a standing ovation. It made him feel uncomfortable. One of the girls had very large breasts. Her boyfriend was watching them jiggle as she jumped up and down. Garrity decided that he was turning into a sex maniac. Look at them Jehubis, Pearson said. Dear, dear me. Garrity wondered if she was a virgin, like he was. So much to love about this.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is someone reading this book who picked it up in like a bargain bin and getting to this page and being like, Jehubis. And then that is the person who eventually cracks the case of Stephen King as Richard Bachman.
I'm imagining the corkboard with all the yarn on it and just Jehubis written in giant red letters.
If he's trying to hide it, Stephen, you're not doing a good job.
Yeah, it would not fool a curious dog with an interest in literature. Yeah, so I can't express how much I love the line, Garrity decided that he was turning into a sex maniac, because I don't know, it's, first of all, it's hilarious. It's also honest at the same time. It's really interesting how much the text focuses on this particular aspect of being a young man, and like he's literally in a death race and he can't stop staring at tits for 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I don't know that we're like going anywhere with this, narratively. It's just very interesting and honest look at the way 16-year-old boys think and are. And I feel like honesty is a big part of what he's going for with this book.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I think, it ties into King's own admission of sex craziness, that like he's going to continue to talk about boobs, which he talks about his entire career, but there's definitely a lot of it in this book. And I like that sentence. I really like the Garrity wondered if she was a virgin like he was, because like, what does that matter?
Yeah.
You're not going to sleep with her. But I like this idea of, I think my favorite part of that is the like he was, like this emphasis that he is a virgin.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there's an unwritten addition to that sentence, and always would be,
Mm-hmm.
like he's here in this death race. The odds are extremely against him. He's probably going to die, and he's a virgin, and he's looking at these beautiful women that he keeps passing. And knows that, I will never get with her. I will never see those Jehubis, because I'm going to die.
Yeah. I mean, I think, gosh, there's a lot here, right? Because I think one reason why, there's a lot of reasons why people go off to war. I always want to be careful here, because I don't want to insinuate that like all of the reasons why a person would join the armed forces are like bad and terrible and childish, because I don't believe that at all. but definitely I think a lot of young men are trying to sort of grasp onto some cachet that will lead to them getting laid at some point because they're young and deeply sexually insecure.
Mm-hmm.
And joining the army seems like it's going to make you into this badass that women are going to throw themselves at. But of course, I'm repeating my comparison between this and joining and you know the walk and joining the army, where it's like you put yourself through this trial, this ordeal, and then you come out of the other side someone like worthy of female attention.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's somewhere in his mind, or at least being stirred into the pot of what's going on here. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something like inherently traditionally masculine about doing this whole race, right? It's endurance, it's strength, it's mind, body, spirit strength, right? Like you're proving yourself. This need of young men to constantly prove how manly they are.
Yeah.
There's certainly some of that here, I think.
Yeah, and it's all men in the contest, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the boys continue on, and we see that Olsen really isn't doing well at this point, Matt. He's right now ready to quit already, and we finished this week with him not quitting yet, so we know he lasts for a while. But you see here this quote unquote early in the walk, he's already ready to give up. And speaking of your military metaphor, this is really I really wanted to dive into that like they're watching him want to quit, and like there's a little bit of each one of these people go, as soon as this guy steps out, that's one person less I have to worry about beating me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this companionship and this bond, but underneath it all, there's this hidden, if I want to live, you are specifically the person standing between me and that outcome.
Mm-hmm. And yet it's not like they're egging him on to quit, right?
Yeah.
It's that's the fascinating tension in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you think they would be. You think like, yeah, as you said, a pessimistic view of humanity would mean all of these kids behave like Barkovich, like that, and they're constantly pushing and prodding and mentally fucking with you in order to get you off your game. But it seems like he is the exception there. He is the only one behaving that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I was thinking about with reference to this, I was thinking about the way that the Major has these like gung-ho esprit de corps type slogans where he's like, give him hell, son, and you're like, at the time, maybe you were just confused because you didn't know what was going on. But now in retrospect, we're like, give who hell? Like, give all the other boys hell? Like, that's the only like literalist interpretation of what he's saying. But he's like encouraging all of them individually. So it's like, you can't encourage all of them because only one of them can survive. And it's almost like it becomes even more insane the more you think about it, that he's saying these slogans at them that actually just make no sense unless you interpret that as just like every man for himself. It's like the opposite of esprit de corps. It's like it's I don't know. It's weirdly, it's like a perversion of esprit de corps is what it is. It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's no enemy here. Like there's no even real like. It's not the type of competition where you're like directly offense defense with other people, right? It's just you versus the road, but you're all doing it at the same time, and so it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So at the Caribou city limits, we see a reporter show up wanting to interview the kids, and we do get mention of TV crews here, Matt. So the Long Walk is on TV, but still, I don't think it's like constantly or consistently, right? It's not like TV entertainment the way it is in some of those other shows and stories we're talking about, like the Hunger Games, for example. And I wonder if that's just a reflection of the time it was written, that like this kind of pervasive, always on TV entertainment thing just didn't exist when King was writing this novel originally, and he just saw it as like a sporting event that you would tune into, via the news and newspaper and stuff like that. But you weren't actively following real time with TV cameras constantly on the walkers.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense as an explanation. Like I guess it would have been weirdly, hyper prescient if he had had like a news crew driving along with the walk for the entire time, just because that, the mass media phenomenon was not really as huge of a thing at the time. So I
Hmm.
can see that being, it just wouldn't quite make sense if that were in this book.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way the Running Man kind of becomes a much more specific example of that kind of idea, right? That
Hmm.
the Running Man is specifically about turning this thing into television entertainment.
Yeah, that's a perfect contrast, which
Hmm.
came out quite a bit later, I guess, or was written quite a bit later.
A little bit. I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Maybe it's just not what he wanted to focus on with this story.
Yeah,
It's hard to say.
Running Man was published in '82. This was published so a few years later.
Hmm. Okay.
But the Running Man is specifically seen as like dystopian future, right? Where Long Walk, so far at least, it seems like dystopian present.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point, because it's actually really hard to place. Like everything feels vaguely 1950s for a reason that I can't put my finger on.
Hmm.
But it could be, like you just said, uh, alternate present contemporaneous with the writing of the book.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting the way in which King has kind of very specifically and what feels like intentionally hidden from our viewpoint the true reality of the world around this walk itself. Like
Mhm.
we get little snippets, little bits and pieces where you can start maybe to piece what this world is like together, but none of it really in a lot of detail. So yeah, what year is it? Like what's going on? We don't get to see a lot of it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, the chapter ends with the kids as they enter the town of Caribou, 45 miles into their long walk. So almost double what I ran in my marathon already. And let me tell you, 26 miles, I was pretty freaking tired, man.
Uh-huh.
So this is starting to get ridiculous, is what I'm saying.
All right.
All right, so chapter 4, I love the opening line of this chapter. Everyone was disappointed with Caribou. And it feels like just the type of thing where, like, you have nothing to look forward to, right? Like, it's just walking. And so you just give yourself checkpoints and signposts and things to look forward to. And it's just going to be a town and you're
Mhm.
still going to be walking. So you're always going to be disappointed with the destination,
Yeah.
always.
Right. I mean, basically, at least while you're walking there, you can pretend that it's going to be something really interesting that's going to divert your attention from your misery. But then it's just like, no, it's just a little town.
Yeah.
Of course it can't.
Yeah, and again, to talk about my marathon, that is something as you're getting to the point of mind over matter, you just start setting little mini goals for yourself,
Hmm.
and in the back of your head is like, oh, when we get to this mile marker, everything will be okay because I'll be there now. And it's like, no, you still have the rest of this race to run. Actually, you're
Hmm.
going to be disappointed even when you get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the shopping center we see in this town with the annual walk-in for value sale, which just seems crazy. The idea that they're like using the walk as like, go ahead and walk in for value, and it's like children are dying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Infinity Gauntlet ice cream, ice cream store in Thor: Love and Thunder.
Mhm.
It's like, what? No, I love it. It's great, and it tells us a little bit more about how normalized and
Yeah.
blasé this has become.
Yeah, it really has. I think that's a great point. That again, just little hints and pieces of what the world is, and it just seems like this is just part of what we do. We have sales every Super Bowl, right? We have a big Super Bowl sale that we use that for an excuses. This is like that. We're gonna do the walk sale.
Yeah, I still am not sure. This is maybe just me being weird, but like I think about how, like, in the Soviet Union, every bread seller had to have prominent signs in his windows saying long live Soviet communism, long live Comrade Stalin, and it's like, at a certain point, it's like there's a competition to be the most obsequiously not a problem to the regime, and then that kind of runs away with itself. So it's like, do these people actually have a walk-in for values sale because they think it's a funny idea, or is this like part of them being like, oh yeah, the walk is great, everybody loves the walk, love the regime, Heil, you know? I again, maybe I'm totally projecting from like my weird idiosyncratic perspective, but the thought is there for me anyway.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, we can't definitively say one way or the other right now, but I think that's very astute.
Cool.
All right, so we got to talk about this part. The kids are all joking around about the major, and we see they all grinned, and Garrity reflected how strange it was about the major, who had gone from God to Mammon in just 10 hours. I love the use of Mammon here, right? Let's talk about it, because I think this is charged with meaning in a way that reflect interestingly on what we're doing here.
Yeah, I don't really. It's funny. I had to look up Mammon because I wasn't really sure what exactly the reference meant. So, you know, interestingly, Mammon's one of those really, really old symbols that kind of means far too many things. But one particular usage that's prominent is Jesus saying you cannot worship both God and Mammon in a context where Mammon is sort of being identified with idolatrous worship of money specifically, which interestingly ties into what Garrity said earlier about money being bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think like in the vernacular, it became like a short circuit way of just the devil, right? Like evil. But Mammon is the Hebrew word for wealth, for money. So I mean,
okay.
It's both kind of, right? Like like the major has gone from God to the devil in just 10 hours, but also reflecting on Garrity's own desire for a world without the concern of money, right?
Yeah, that's because I mean, laying it out like that, I mean, it really does seem like the money connection is pretty intentional. Although, like, what does the major have to do with money exactly? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know. I think it's just to me it reflects on an interesting thing on King, of course, but also on Garrity, who like it is not, I think, super common that someone would say like would do a Mammon reference here, right? Like,
right.
And I don't know if we're pronouncing the word right, so apologies if we're not. It's one of those words that I've read, never said out loud.
I have no idea.
But I mean, like, just that he's kind of an actually well-read person who would make a reference like this, I find just really interesting, and it kind of fits into what we understand of him, I think.
Sure, yeah, that's totally fair, right? I don't think when I was 16 I would have said Mammon. I would have said Satan, you know. Yeah.
And Garrity is also the one where they were talking about money, who references that, like, the Jesus quote about, you know, sooner a camel passing through the eye of a needle than a rich person getting into heaven, right? So like he seems to, for a person who, you know, claims and I think says explicitly he's not religious, he seems to make a lot of religious references.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. It reminds me of Children of the Corn, where the characters don't explicitly acknowledge that they're religious, but they are, like, the whole story is about religion, and they're both extremely knowledgeable about religion. Yeah.
Speaking of religion, a little bit later, a kid gets shot, and we get this line here. The word was that his foot had stiffened up on him badly. When he was shot 10 minutes later, Garrity didn't feel much. He was too tired. He walked around Fenter. Looking down, he saw something glittering in Fenter's hand, a St. Christopher's medal. So I pulled this for many reasons, right? I think the one is the first kid that got shot was this horrifying moment for us, the reader, and also Garrity, the character, right? The kind of the mask, the illusion of what this was falling away, and the cold reality of it just horrified and shocked him. And now here, 8 hours later, we've already gotten to the point where Garrity's really not feeling this anymore. The loss, it's too, there's people are too tired, there's too much, and like it's just not doing anything to them anymore. And that's, to me, reflective of like the state and exactly what it wants to do, right?
Yeah, the numbing and the increasing suffering leading them to just become inured and more focused on their own suffering than they can possibly be focused on the suffering of the others. Yeah, I mean, I for all that sort of everyone is behaving admirably at this point, in terms of somewhat supporting each other or at least not actively undermining each other, it's like, man, how long can that keep going as everyone just keeps getting more and more miserable?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, I love the image of the St. Christopher's medal as well, which is
Right.
a Catholic symbol of protection. Like if you want to be protected, you wear a St. Christopher's medal. And so that this kid being murdered, being dead with a St. Christopher's medal in his hand is very symbolic of their. I mean, explicitly, God is not going to protect you. Like there's no protection from this.
Yeah, it's so despite having been raised Catholic, I never saw a St. Christopher's medal in my life, but I look up a picture of it, and the interesting thing about the St. Christopher's medal is that it's a picture of like a guy with staff walking, which, St. Christopher's medals have appeared in other king books, but it seems particularly interesting that it's like the guy's, he's going somewhere. He's on a trek. He's on a long walk, you could say.
Yeah.
He's in every version of the St. Christopher's medal that I can find. He has a staff in his hand and he's like actively walking.
Yeah, he's the patron saint of travelers. So like one of the most common things to do if you're Catholic and buy into this is to put a St. Christopher's medallion like on your car, like hanging from your dash, right? Like protection while journeying, while traveling.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it didn't work, Matt.
Didn't work. How
God
ironic.
is not here today.
Yep.
So the conversation heads to something else. Love. We start talking about love. And Matt, I love this so much. Like what King is doing here is he's like perfectly capturing these normal conversations that a group of adolescent boys would have with each other. But it's like all tinged with the reality of their situation, right? They're talking about the importance of money when you're walking to either win it or die. You're talking about true love and if true love is real, but you're talking about that with a group of boys that will most likely never get to experience it. And I love all the details of it. And I love that the conversation goes like exactly how a teenage conversation would go, which is it just switches topics wildly and then ends up talking about how Edgar Allan Poe was possibly a necrophiliac, and like it's just spot on. It's spot on.
Yes, this is exactly the kind of conversation that we would have in Boy Scouts. Just startlingly accurate.
Mm-hmm. It's so good. It's like, and it says the thing that we've talked about many times that King has been able to do. He captures psychology and moments of people in a way that I just never really like. Reading a book about a young boy written by Stephen King, you suddenly find yourself remembering memories you haven't thought about forever about being a young boy. And the same with now teenagers here. Like his recall and his ability to not only remember these scenarios, but then recreate them in a way that it feels completely authentic is just, it's so good.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever encountered anything quite like this particular superpower of his.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
I'm really also fascinated by this section where Garrity kind of falls asleep while walking, and we shoot back to his past with a friend of his named Jimmy Owens and their disagreement of what a woman looks like down there. And again, this ties into what you were talking about with Jehubis, that the preoccupation with the opposite sex and sex itself. It seems like we're definitely doing this kind of warped coming of age thing with Garrity that I find really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it seems like his relationship with sexuality is this like duality of disgust and fascination. Like, and this sort of thing also threads, I think, through his thoughts about his girlfriend in interesting ways later. And we'll get to that later, I guess. But like,
yeah,
man, you know what? I just made this connection, but it's like this is the seeds of low Kamala versus, I forget the other word, the high Kamala, I guess. The like the like red versus the pink, the elevated, loving another person for their qualities and that elevating you, which actually seems to be the way that he thinks about his girlfriend, in a very kind of pure way, versus the kind of low Kamala way that he is, staring at breasts as he walks down the road, and gave the one girl the kiss and grabbed her butt. It's like, and then he later felt embarrassed about it. It's like this war between those two sides of himself, that we're seeing kind of play out internally.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I love that, because this is a struggle that he's having, and a thing that he's really, he was very, very embarrassed by how he acted with that one girl in the first chapter. And by the end of this week's reading, he kind of pledges himself to, I think he says specifically to McVrees, I'm done with that sort of thing. Like, that's, I got a girl, I'm going to be faithful to her. And it's not even really about sex, because he hasn't had it with her yet. It's just, there's a difference between love and lust, and he is recognizing and seemingly aware of that difference, and is specifically choosing the former.
Yeah, right. At least in that moment. I mean, it seems like there's a natural ebb and flow, which is hard to control.
Sure. He's a 16-year-old kid.
Right.
Yeah. I really like this as well. This is just fantastic writing to me. Garrity thought that memories were like a line drawn in the dirt. The further back you went, the scuffier and harder to see the line got, until finally there was nothing but smooth sand and the black hole of nothingness that you came out of. The memories were in a way like the road. Here it was real and hard and tangible. But that early road, that 9 a.m. road, was far back and meaningless. Man, that's fucking great. I love that so much.
Yeah, me too. That's some of the just soaring prose that sneaks up on you in this book.
And yet, like, the thing I love about this is he kind of concludes here that memories are useless and meaningless because it's not here, it's not now. And yet he kind of comes out of this thing saying, but my memories are mine and I'm going to hold on to them and protect them, So like, meaningless, useless, but still who I am, part of me.
Yeah. I think that's, wonder how that sort of sentiment plays out over the course of the book. There's a lot at play here where I don't really quite know how it's all going to come together, but I feel very strongly that it will. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's, no, that feels right.
Yeah.
So Garrity, in his daze, picks up 2 warnings in rapid succession, putting himself in the danger zone for the next 2 hours. And then, as the boys round a curve, they see a sign up ahead that says, steep grade, trucks use low gear, and lots of groaning.
Yeah. Gosh. I honestly hadn't felt much in the way of like tension or suspense up until this point in the book, because, I mean, partly just because, like, hey, there's a lot of book left. Pretty sure that Garrity's not going to die at any point in the near future. So I was kind of like, okay, we're good. But like, now I've become connected to some of these other characters.
Yeah.
And then we're confronted with the steep grade, and you feel Garrity's worry for himself partially, but also for the other boys.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the true facts of storytelling that, like, we can see exactly how long this book is, and we know that, hey, our main character, we're probably not going to suddenly switch perspectives here in the middle of the book, especially since, as you said, like, so much of this book is driven by Raymond Garrity's perspective specifically, that we can kind of at least say, I mean, you're probably not going to die on the next page, but it does, like, demonstrate, like, I think one thing that it does demonstrate is like how quickly things can switch, right? He's not tired. I mean, he's tired, but he's not having a cramp. He doesn't have diarrhea. He's not bleeding. Like, he just lost focus for a little bit. And that's all it takes. Just losing a little bit of focus.
Yeah. And again, he has, like you just said, he has the two warnings. So any further minor lapse could be the end of him.
Yep. All right, Matt, it's a hill. It's a big hill. Let's talk about hills. They suck.
Don't like them.
They're awful.
Not a fan.
Yeah.
I
It's
live
not
near
fun.
some
If you've
hills.
never walked up a hill, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had to do hill work in our marathon training, and it was my least favorite day of the training. I hated it so much.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
awful. We
My
had a really, really big hill, and we just ran up it, and then we ran down, and then we ran up it, and then we ran down it, and it hurts and it's miserable. Let me tell you something you might not know about hills, Matt.
huh?
The going up, it sucks, but you know what also sucks?
What?
The going down
Huh.
sucks too. Actually,
Yeah, because you're like catching yourself with every step.
yeah, and it like going up is hard on your muscles and on your lungs, right? But going down is like hard on your frame,
Yeah. Your
you.
your
Every
ligaments.
step when
Yeah.
your feet are tired and hurting, every step going down hurts.
Yeah. Man, why'd you do that? That sounds like it sucked.
It was awful.
You shouldn't
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Why did I do that? I don't know, because I decided I wanted to one day. But yeah, hills, not fun. Really, really not fun. Especially like your pace will drop when you're on a hill. Like that's just what happens. Your pace drops. Theirs cannot.
Yep. I there's hills on my typical walk that I go through, and I know they're good for me, but they're my least favorite part.
Mm-hmm. So they all head up the hill, and we can see immediately that people are not doing well. Olsen, again, who hours ago was already exhausted, is here just now kind of audibly saying he just can't do it, but he keeps going. But not so for some of the other ones. That we see another kid named Larson just sits down, collects his warnings, and gets shot. I quoted this here because I think it's just so disturbing. He says, "Listen, I'll catch up." Larson hastened to assure them, "I'm just resting. A guy can't walk all the time. Not all the time, can he, fellas?" And then it's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is one of the more disturbing ones for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
I guess partly just because we're watching the whole thing kind of play out in slow motion, and we know where it's headed. And you can see like something kind of broke in his brain, but not so completely that he doesn't realize what's happening. That's just like he can't accept the situation anymore, and it's like relatable. It's like you can imagine just being pushed past whatever invisible threshold you have inside yourself that you're not aware of, and snap.
Yep. And snap, several people do. I think you're right that the most disturbing part of that whole thing is that the moment at the last minute where he like realizes and tries to get up and tries to get walking again. And it's too late.
Yeah.
So 3 people die on the hill, but no one close to Ray. So what do we care, right?
Right. They're not characters.
Yeah. And they make it to the top. The conversation eventually picks up again, and it turns to the end of the long walk. Questions people are asking if anyone has ever seen it, and no one has. No one but our good old friend Stebbins, who says yes, he saw the long walk a few years ago, and he tells his story about how it went down. And the story, Matt, is horrifying. We get here, he says, "I could hear them coming before I could see them. We all could. It was one big sound wave getting closer and closer, and it was still an hour before they got close enough to see. They weren't looking at the crowd, either of the 2 that were left. It was like they didn't even know the crowd was there. What they were looking at was the mad." The road? What does it say, mad? I think my thing sometimes copy and paste wrong. Yeah. What they were looking at was the road. They were hobbling along, both of them, like they had been crucified and then taken down and made to walk with nails still through their feet. And those feet we see are like horrible, purple, bruised, broken things.
Their shoes have just totally disintegrated. Their socks have disintegrated. It's just miserable. Yeah.
And we see here eventually one of them falls over, the other wins, but what does he do? What does he say? He runs over to the dead boy and is just whispering something into his ear, something we don't get to see here.
Yeah. Which it's totally heartbreaking. It's like we can imagine. Okay, so this is my thought, is like I can imagine this being like Garrity and God damn it,
McVrees.
McVrees, because like they are growing closer, and you can imagine them being in the situation where like obviously they don't want to die, but the idea that the other guy is going to have to die for them to live is just so horrible that
Mm-hmm.
it's just psyche breaking. Now, I'm not saying that I predict that that's what's going to happen. What I'm saying is like that's like the image that jumped into my mind when we saw this tableau being described was like I projected those two characters into this situation and was like, oh my god, yeah, that would be so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it like even more relatable, even though we don't know these characters in this story that's being related. But yeah, I mean, there's something. It's incredibly poignant,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of maybe explains why Stebbins has this totally different mindset and behavior than the other boys, because he's seen what this is. You know, he's seen how these boys become dear friends over the course of this death race, and winning means killing their new blood brothers effectively, and how it's designed to break them. And so I think maybe Stebbins' mentality is like, well, then I'm not going to succumb to that. I'm not going
Yeah.
to allow myself to become attached to the other boys, and that way they can't get that hold on me.
Yeah. No, I agree. This is, of course, everyone knew that this is the way it was going to end, but just having Stebbins lay it out there for them is horrifying to them, and they kind of demand that he shut up to stop talking about this. But they knew.
Yeah, they probably.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's one thing about knowing that it's going to come down between two people, and then one of them is going to die and the other is going to live. It's another to see. Like, I think obviously the most poignant moment of that is when he just goes to his friend and is talking to him, because it's not even about winning anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, because you can imagine, again, sort of putting myself in the perspective of young Matt being like, maybe you just imagine this being like a marathon where you just imagine everyone just walking along, and then the second to last guy dies, and the last guy is like, yeah, I did it, woohoo, and it's and like you tell yourself this sanitized story about how it's going to go. You don't acknowledge the horror of it.
And to your point about like what the prize could possibly be, one thing Stebbins says here is that their feet were so like irreparably fucked up that he's kind of like, I don't know, maybe like with his money he could like have surgery or something, but I don't think they were ever going to be the same again, right? Like even the winner does not leave this thing both mentally and physically well.
Yeah, exactly.
It will destroy them no matter what.
Right.
And that ends chapter 4. So we move on to chapter 5. This chapter begins with Garrity taking an inventory of himself. He looks himself over. He's in okay shape. His legs are tired, but pretty much okay. His feet are really, really starting to hurt. Feet hurt. Just a lot of pressure you're putting on your feet every time you pick them up and put them down.
Yeah, they'll do that. My feet were hurting about an hour into my walk at the zoo with my kids, and I was ready to sit down, take a little break, get off those dogs.
Yeah. So one thing, I swear to God, I'm not going to talk about marathon training every 5 minutes, but like one thing we learned is in any kind of distance work like this, like your skeletal system is like the last thing to get stronger. It takes the longest. So like, your lungs like get acclimated relatively quickly. Your muscles then, get built up, and then it's really just the longest thing, the thing you have to spend the most amount of time training for him is just to strengthen your body's skeletal system to get used to putting all this weight down constantly. And that's really something that these kids could not have possibly, like, I mean, we haven't seen, did any of them like train for this, like what would training for this even be?
Yeah, it's not clear, right? I mean, there are ultra marathoners who run these like 100-mile races. So like, I think you can get your body into a place where it's like everything is just elastic and hard where it needs to be hard, and
Mhm.
stretchy where it needs to be stretchy and all this. But like, I think the point of this race is it just goes until you break,
Yeah.
and until only one person has not broken, basically.
Yeah. There's no finish line. Yeah.
Because like, and I mean, it's interesting to think about the human body, because the human body is just, it's matter. It's matter just like any other thing. You take a piece of steel and you bend it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You do that enough times, you will snap steel. You can do it with your
Mhm.
bare hands. You can snap steel with your bare hands if you just bend it enough times, right?
Mhm.
And all tissues in your body are the same. You cycle them enough times without rest and recovery, and they will fail.
Mhm.
A law of physics almost. So
Mhm.
that's what they're up against here.
Yeah. It's inevitable.
Yeah, right.
So conversation starts to pick up again, and again, it's the typical things that teenagers would, shoot the shit about. Enemas.
Yeah, necrophilia, enemas, just exactly normal conversation for
Like we're not kidding though. Like
yeah.
this is the weird random shit that you end up talking about in your friends groups. And then like we get to a point where the boys are all telling each other tall tales and like trying to one up each other with the most ridiculous tale that they've had. And this is, I mean, it's great. It's real, and I find it incredibly heartbreaking because like it really demonstrates to us these are just kids. They're
Yeah.
just 16-year-old kids and they're going to die.
Yeah.
And it just sucks.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's almost like sweet. I mean, it's funny because it's sort of a gross subject matter, but it's like, yeah, but they're doing the kid thing of trying to like one up each other's gross story.
Mhm.
It's all from a place of like vulnerable youth. It's that they're not. I don't know. I felt strongly compassionate toward these children at this point in the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, me too. Because they're real. They really feel real.
Yeah, yeah.
So, speaking of children that you feel a lot of compassion towards, let's talk about Barkovich. I think the closest thing that an antagonist that this book has an antagonist outside of course, the major and the system itself, we see here in this moment that Barkovich just starts randomly yelling at a kid next to him named Rank. He eggs him on. Rank loses it, swings at him, gets a warning, and that doesn't stop Barkovich. He keeps going. It all ends up with Rank dead, and McVree's calling him a murderer. So Matt, Barkovich.
Uh-huh.
What do you think about this guy?
Um, so as we've kind of suggested before, it's kind of amazing that Barkovich is the only one of them behaving this way,
Mhm.
since this is a death race. uh, and we've seen very few, if any, other examples of poor sportsmanship. Maybe just here and there, people getting on each other's nerves in a way that felt kind of natural, but not like actively sabotaging. Um, and again, like I feel like out of every batch of kids, there is going to be a Barkovich, but most of the boys, while they may be competitive, they're not psychopaths. They're not really trying to kill each other. Um, now, the interesting thing about Barkovich that maybe you're actually asking me is like, is what he's doing even actually wrong? Because like, what is he supposed to do? Right? Like only one person can survive. It's not like that guy was going to live and have a fulfilled life with many grandchildren if Barkovich hadn't done that. Like unless that was the guy who was going to win, in which case Barkovich would be dead. It's
Yeah.
literally uh uh like ultimate prisoner's dilemma where the no, it's not prisoner's dilemma, because in prisoner's dilemma you have the option of cooperate. There is no cooperate. There is only defect. There is defect, or just sort of like stand there and wait to die. I don't know. It's what do you think about Barkovich, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's an asshole, but I think you raise a really interesting point here that like what what is morale, like the idea of these boys kind of looking at what Barkovich just did there and like objectively immoral, yes, but like what are you doing? Like, I mean, it's just like, what does it mean to not do that? It means nothing. It changes nothing.
Let me put it this way. We both have, sons. If your son was going to be put in the long walk, would you tell him to be more like Barkovich, or would you tell him to be more like, I don't know, McVries, as a matter of strategic preparation? I'm not sure that I know the answer to that, but I don't think I would be like, well, make sure that you play fair and make friends with all the other boys. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. I want my boy to survive, right?
Uh-huh.
All I care about is that he survives, actually. I care about that more than I care about whether he was being moral. So,
right. Well, I mean, it rises to an interesting question about, like, what is our why are we here? And speaking not just in the race, but like exist. Like, what is the point of living a life? Like, what do you want to have accomplished? And and like the idea that it's objectively a shitty thing to do, right? To egg someone on to the point that they get killed. It's like objectively shitty, but this is a scenario in which no human being is probably ever going to actually have to face, because there's no other outcome. Like there's no version. Like, I think, we have a really great example in the Hunger Games, which spoils for the Hunger Games, ends with our two remaining characters not doing the thing that we were kind of dreading them having to do the entire time, which is, okay, we're the only two left. We have to turn on each other. Only one of us can live. The other must die. The Hunger Games is, in that universe, allowed to circumvent that concept, right? Like, we're allowed to say, no, we are going to collectively choose to no longer participate. Like, if everyone, from everything we've been told about the story right now, if every one of these boys banded together and unionized and said, we're done walking, then the soldiers would just go, okay, you're dead.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I do like the framing that you're suggesting, where it's like a metaphor for life, where it's like you're gonna die.
Yeah.
One way or the other. So you might as well get through life honorably and morally and decently, and be able to, like, look yourself in the mirror at the end of it. I think the difference, the specific thing about the long walk that's different is, like, no, well, you can actually just survive and live a long and full life. So that makes it a little bit different from real life, but you could still argue that, like, well, in real life you have the option of, throwing your friends and colleagues under the bus for financial gain and so forth. And then it's like, yeah, I won, which is, we do consider that to be immoral. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's still, funnily enough, I still feel like I would tell my son to be totally ruthless, while at the same time maybe not necessarily endorsing that strategy for myself, which is an interesting. I mean,
I would probably tell my son to not do it.
Sure, but I'm imagining that he's, like, drafted or something. Like, you have to give him a strategy. What's the strategy?
Sure.
This is a really, like, fun thought experiment for both of us, I realize.
No, I hate it. I hate it so much, and I don't understand why you're doing this to me. But yeah, I mean, like, if this very specific scenario that you've concocted here happened, I would probably, I like, it would be very cold comfort to be told, yeah, your kid got shot, but, like, when one of his fellow walkers decided to give up, he picked up all his warnings, trying to encourage that guy to keep going.
Yeah.
And then he slipped a little bit and then he died. It's like, oh, cool. Yeah. I guess I can feel good about him being a good person.
Right.
It's dead.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's that's I feel like I'm introducing just totally weird dynamic by making it like a thing where a father would make the decision, because that's not really what's happening here. It's just
sure.
It's what jumped into my head because I have a son, Who's
Yeah, no, and I think broadly it is this really perfectly evil concoction of like, what does it mean to be a good person? Um, and I mean, like, I think you, regardless of what we say about any of this, and we probably spent too much time talking about this, but like, I don't think Barkovich is a good person. But what does that matter? And like you said, how far is he going to get in this? And how far he gets in this will at least reflect in some way on this kind of strategy for winning this thing.
right. Yeah.
So we also get a note here that the bridge up ahead was washed out, and so the walk would have to be temporarily halted while they fix it. But by the time our walkers get to the bridge, the government has solved the problem, so there's no stopping. You'll just walk across this makeshift bridge. This is so mean.
Yes. God, excellent method of torture. Just no notes.
I yeah, part of you goes like, is this real? Like, did this really happen, or did they just want to fuck with them? Because like,
Yeah.
part of you is like, there's this thing that keeps happening in the walk where like information is getting passed back, right? When we get to 50 miles, the major is going to show up, and like, oh, the bridge is washed out ahead, and you're like, where are you getting this from?
Mhm.
Like, because the soldiers on the half track, like, we haven't heard them talk one time.
Sure.
Like, the only thing they say we've seen is warning. This is your third warning. That's it. And so where's this information coming from?
That's a great
And so
question.
it's like it makes you want to think rather insidiously that like this is just part of it.
Yeah, part of the mind games. I mean, it could be the
Mhm.
boys doing mind games on each other too, or
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I don't know. I never really thought about that. That's interesting.
I'm surprised someone didn't quit right there, to be honest with you, because like,
Mhm.
I don't know, when you're working out and like the instructor's like 2 more minutes and then you get a rest break, and like you get to the rest break and they're like, just kidding, we're gonna do another 5.
Yeah.
It's just like, fuck you, I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm just done. You
Yeah.
tricked me.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. Just literally kill me. Yeah.
Yeah. But Matt, we do get to see here a road worker working on the bridge is taking bets on the winner. He recognizes Garrity, main zone, and he says he's got money on him at 12-1 odds, which I guess is better than 100-1.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, thanks, man. Yeah. Man, what a thing to say to a person, you know?
Yeah.
Like that. That's just a great encapsulation of how dehumanized everyone has become. Where it's like,
Mhm.
it's like, what do you want? What do you want me to say to that? Like, well, I hope I win so that you get money. Also, I will live.
Yeah.
You jackass.
It also starts to introduce the idea that like this is not only like entertainment, but is like there's a industry around it.
Yeah. It's become not just like normalized, but like embraced. It's like part of society. Yeah.
So McVrees and Garrity are having a talk about winning, which they both at this point have kind of agreed is not really in the cards for either of them. I really love what McVrees says about here, about, the human spirit and the brain. And he says, it isn't man or God, it's something in the brain. We see here, he says, some of those guys will go on walking long after the laws of biochemistry and handicapping have gone to the boards. There was a guy last year that crawled for 2 miles at 4 miles an hour after both his feet cramped up at the same time. You remember reading about that? Look at Olsen. He's worn out, but he keeps going. That goddamn Barkovich is running on high octane hate, and he just keeps going, and he's as fresh as a daisy. I don't think I can do that. I'm not tired. Not really tired yet, but I will be. The scar stood out on the side of his haggard face, and he looked ahead in the darkness. And I think, when I get tired enough, I think I'll just sit down. This is a really great, like, way of just encapsulating this mind over matter idea, that is anytime you're doing any kind of physical activity, the idea that your body is capable of so much more than you think it is at any given moment, and at some point it just becomes about your brain forcing yourself to do it. Like, ever since you told me, I think we've talked about this on the show before, but ever since you told me that when you hold your breath, that feeling that you get is almost entirely your brain just demanding you to take a breath, and you don't actually need breath at that point. It's just your brain saying, no, I want this. Like, that has fucked me up.
Yeah.
And I think about that like every time I work out, like every time I'm tired, every time I want to stop, I want to quit early, any of that stuff. It's just like, oh, this is just your brain fucking with you.
Yeah.
You don't need to stop yet.
And it's not like being aware of that fact makes it any easier to hold your breath.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you work at it for a long time, you can like perfect it to like, there's people that can hold their breath for a very, very long amount of time, right?
Yes, that's true. But a lot of that is them just pushing through that horrible sensation, actually.
Yep.
Which again, like the sensation is not the need for oxygen; it's the feeling of an excess of CO2, and you can survive an excess of CO2. What you can't survive is a lack of oxygen. Unfortunately, when you lack oxygen, that doesn't feel like anything. You just pass out and then die if the problem doesn't alleviate itself. But it's just, yeah, but that's just one of the many ways that our body like keeps us from hurting ourselves, by actually putting the like warning sign like way in advance of the actual injury and danger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, McVries is correct here. Also, I just want to say, like, interesting how McVries is increasingly coming to the forefront as perhaps like the primary character who isn't the protagonist.
Yeah, he's definitely the number 2 at this point.
Yeah. Like his scar is a thing that I'm very invested in finding out more about. At the very least, it's suggestive of some interesting past that we haven't seen.
Yeah, I think Garrity asked him point blank about it at one point, and he just doesn't answer.
Yeah, right. Yep.
So as the boys approach midnight, Garrity once again gets to thinking. He thinks about Jan again, his girlfriend, his first kiss. He thinks about how he taught her how to knit and dance, and she taught him how to enjoy books more casually, which is another hilarious, like, he only reads like we do. And she's like, no, you can just like read and then put the book down and go on with your life. He's like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
There is something kind of fascinatingly like intentionally gender reversed about, the idea of him teaching her to knit and dance.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's extremely wholesome. It's extremely none of this machismo masculine bullshit is present here. It's just like I really like her. She really likes me, and this is beautiful and pure. And the reader may have been starting to think that Garrity is some kind of sex maniac because of how he's been thinking. But it's like, no, he's just a kid. He has flashes of like sexual, I don't know, mania is too strong a word, just intrusive sexual thoughts because he's a 16-year-old boy. But like, he's just a sweet kid who loves his girlfriend. It's just sad and beautiful.
Yeah, and I like that. And it almost kind of forces you to come to the conclusion that Garrity is not here for the machismo, like proving that you're a man thing, like he's not here to like prove to his girlfriend that he's a manly man,
right?
Because he's the one that he taught her the traditionally feminine task, right? It seems like their relationship is not one where like there's an expectation of I like my men manly,
Yeah.
And so it really complicates that relationship. And I really love, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but he thinks about her later and kind of admits to himself that he's kind of made her a totem, that like he's made her more important in his mind than she actually is. That this like, that, if he had not done this and this relationship had just carried on, it might have turned into something long-term. It might have just petered out, and he's just made her like a symbol of something that he wants. And not even, again, not sexually, just like an idea of something he wants.
Yeah, isn't it something like he's like he decided that like he loved her, even though that was never a thought that he had really had before.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to point out here is just we get so few morsels of what this world is like. So we get something here. They're talking about the towns that they're going to be traveling through, and they say, how about Augusta? Christ, I thought that was in Georgia. Yeah, I've been to Augusta. It's the state capital. Regional, Abraham says. And the corporate governor's mansion, and a couple of traffic circles, and a couple of movies. So again, that phrase corporate governor's mansion is just a little morsel
Yeah.
of things being different here, and the response to Augusta being the state capital and Abraham saying regional. What does that mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's again, we don't know, right? But it is interesting that he would even like state capital. Maybe that was what they used to the word they used to use, but now we say regional. We don't say state anymore. It's like, is
Yeah,
that, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's hard to say.
that was my read, but yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's really interesting that like it's very deliberate, right? Like King must have set out here to specifically say, I am not going to give you a lot of real tangible details to grab onto as far as what the world outside of the walk is. And that has purpose to it. Like he I guess he doesn't, maybe it's specifically to avoid direct comparisons. He wants it to be vague, so this has a much more general read to it.
Yeah, maybe so. I guess I don't think I can say yet, because it's like, are we going to get an info dump at some point? If so,
Sure.
then that says one thing. If not, if it's literally all just this tantalizing hinting, then that's a different vibe.
Yeah, no, you're right. So the walk continues. I guess I want to point out here that I'm kind of glossing over a lot of details that really make this book great, because, you know, just practically there's not enough time to talk about them all. But I mean, it's a really, like, just the idea of this book, right? It's a book in which 100 boys walk in a straight line for so many days, dying one by one. That's it. You know, they talk, they walk, they die.
Yeah.
That's the book. Plot wise, that's the book. And yet it's the details. It's the details of all the stuff that make the whole thing so captivating. Garrity's internal thought process, how the pain is described, how the kids interact, how they don't interact. I love, like, this moment is like a perfect encapsulation of this to me. There's Garrity is walking through a town, sees a man cheering him on, and notes and kind of chuckles to himself that the man hasn't zipped his fly all the way up, that it's half zipped. It's an insignificant, meaningless detail, but it's one that the book highlights. And this is the thing that this book does again and again and again, is highlight these meaningless details. And it goes into what you were talking about, the naturalism of why are we talking about this man's half unzipped fly? Well, because Garrity noticed it. That's why. Because we're following him directly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unfortunately, due to the nature of our whole approach and the limitations of the medium, like it's kind of like we're talking about a Monet painting that we're looking at, and like we're limited to mainly be talking about the subject matter of the painting, like yes, trees and a river and a bridge, and like it's much harder to be like you can say, hey, you notice how it's kind of painted in a way that more captures the feeling of the thing rather than the vivid truth of the thing in a precise way. Yeah, I noticed that. Anyway, moving on, like there's only so much time you can spend talking about that, but like I totally agree, that's like the most interesting thing about this book is this naturalistic kind of just stream of consciousness, moment to moment unfolding of events and thoughts and perceptions. So
yeah. It's one of those things that, like, this book has not been adapted into a movie yet. I think there was an announcement a few years ago after the big push of let's adapt everything Stephen King when it came out.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, I wonder how you can do this in a movie format, you know?
Yeah.
Because, like, so much of it is exactly what you're talking about. Where, like, I mean, I think a good director could capture the naturalism we're talking about here, but like as an event, so much of this plot, so much of the story is just people walking, dying, and talking, and that's pretty much it.
You kind of have to pull a Gerald's Game and have flashbacks, and I mean, there are scenes built into the thing where there are specific conversations with specific other characters, so that takes up some screen time. But you got to have some flashbacks. You got to have some, like, how did we get here? You know, which is interestingly absent from the story, actually. Like because you would expect I would expect the way this story would be structured would be we gradually begin to understand why Garrity made this decision through a series of flashbacks. And there's still enough book left that could happen, but that has not happened at all so far.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves me on the same page as you, thinking like, yeah, I don't know how you would adapt this.
I don't know. Maybe I haven't heard news about this adaptation in a while, but maybe one day it will come out and we'll talk about it.
I just think about that very short moment of the film Soldier starring Kurt Russell toward the beginning. You know what I'm talking about? Have you memorized
Yes,
this
actually.
movie?
Of course I do. Yeah.
Where it's basically this.
No, yeah. But could you do that for a whole movie? I mean, this is one of those things, and I love this. Part of what I love so much about this book is like, if you told me the concept of the book, I would be like, oh, that's like a really cool idea, actually. How are you going to make that work for a whole novel?
Right.
And this book continues to prove exactly how you do that. But like, that's the thing where I'm like, how are you going to make this work for a whole movie?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you got a kind of an avant-garde director, they could film it in this sort of naturalistic way where the camera is, focusing on these strange details that the boys are paying attention to, and make it feel like suck you into the experience of the thing, make it feel like you're on the long walk with them.
Yeah. No, I agree with you that someone could do it well, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who it was announced that was working on it. I was trying to look it up while you were talking, and it was someone I was very excited about, but I can't remember now.
Okay. Oh, well.
Maybe we'll talk about that later. All right. Here's a bit that I just wanted to read for you because the sun has set. It's dark out, Matt, and it's here's some writing for you. The darkness. Goddamn the darkness. It seemed to Garrity they had been buried alive in it, immured in it. Dawn was a century away. Many of them would never see the dawn or the sun. They were buried 6 feet deep in the darkness. All they needed was the monotonous chanting of the priest, his voice muffled but not entirely obscured by the new packed darkness, above which the mourners stood. The mourners were not even aware that they were here. They were alive. They were screaming and scratching and clawing at the coffin-lid darkness. The air was flaking and costing away. The air was turning into poison gas, hope fading until hope itself was a darkness. And above all of it, the nodding chapel bell voice of a priest and the impatient shuffling feet of the mourners, anxious to be off into the warm May sunshine. Then, overmastering that, the sighing, shuffling chorus of the bugs and the beetles squirming their way through the earth. Come for the feast. Holy shit. Holy shit.
God. Yeah, it's amazing. It's the whole nighttime sequence is like a nightmare. It's like it reads like a nightmare feels. It's amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's horrifying the way like he's zoning out, and like I don't know, just like it's one of those moments where you could put yourself directly in these kids' position and just be like, how the fuck are you going to maintain 15 miles an hour when you're half, or 15 minute miles when you're half asleep?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Yeah. That's another consideration where it's like, maybe I hadn't even thought of this at the beginning of the book. Like last week, I was not even thinking like, oh, you got to add in sleep deprivation on top of everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Our chapter ends with a boy in a trench coat, number 45, suddenly starting to behave erratically, wandering around, falling over. We see Garrity suddenly immediately needs to know the boy's name, and he asks him for it over and over and over again. But number 45 doesn't answer and dies. And the chapter ends with him dying unnamed. Garrity saying maybe it wasn't that important after all.
Yep.
Just a horrifying little scene to end our chapter on.
Yep. He's got a lot more opportunities to hit us with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm just fascinated by Garrity's like sudden insistence. Like he knows this guy is dying, and it's like it's really interesting that like the book doesn't come out and say this, right? It doesn't say Garrity recognizes he's going to die and wants to know him before he does. So at least like someone will know who this person is and someone can remember him and his name. But that's kind of what it is, right? It's what it has to be. Like
that was my feeling as well. Although you're right that it doesn't say it explicitly.
But we're so plugged into Garrity's head that it's like does he not realize it? Does he he's just going and he's not even realizing it anymore, that like what's motivating his behavior here?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Garrity doesn't. I would not give him grand prize for self-awareness, just in general. So it's possible that like he's just acting without really knowing why.
Yeah, I think the line that really got me though was when he's doing this, and I think Olsen says something to the effect of, "Don't bother him. He's dying. Don't bother him."
Yeah,
it's awful.
It's awful, but it's interesting how you can even take that as compassionate.
Yeah. Just let him die in peace.
Yeah, right.
All right, we move on to chapter 6, our final chapter of the evening. It begins a little further into the night, 3:30 in the morning. The boys are, of course, still walking. We learn that 24 of them are gone. They've walked 75 miles, and they've still got a lot of people left. So this is going on for a while.
Jesus. Yeah.
And it continues to be the darkness, the middle of the night. He's kind of zoned in and out. I love the writing here. Again, the dream writing. He looked at the road quite a lot now. Sometimes the white line was solid. Sometimes it was broken. And sometimes it was double, like streetcar tracks. He wondered how people could ride over this road all of the other days of the year and not see the pattern of life and death in that white paint. Or did they see it, after all?
I like that.
Love it.
I like that in particular because it does kind of hit that beat that I keep thinking about, where it's like the fact that this society endorses this activity becomes part of the fabric of the society, and everyone's complicity in it, reaffirms their kind of inhuman participation in this horrible machine, which then ensures its perpetuation.
Yeah, that's true. Because like this is every other day of the year a road. It's just a road, and people drive on it. People like travel on it constantly. And what must that be like?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think about the lottery. Like, there's the character in Shirley Jackson's The Lottery where it's like he's the old man, and he's like, it's really important that we do this thing, and it's like nobody's making them do that. Like that's the key thing about the lottery is there is no the major character in the lottery. It's like no, the old man actually thinks this is a good idea because he grew up in the society where this is what we do. This is just what we do. It's what we've always done.
Do you think King kind of set out? I mean, I know the lottery is a very, very different story than this. But do you think kind of set out in his mind to be like, I want to do something like that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, doesn't he reference the lottery, or at least reference Shirley Jackson explicitly in the part where he's talking about the books that Garrity would read or something like that?
Yes.
So,
there's also this line at the end of the last chapter where he says he's walking through a town and it felt very Shirley Jackson short story-esque as they walk through this weird town, this empty town. Yeah. For no reason, Garrity could have put a finger on it. He felt as if he just walked through a short Shirley Jackson short story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, inspiration, homage, something in that space.
And again, I have to say, how did Stephen King think he was going to get away with this? He referenced Shirley Jackson in his Bachman book. You always do that, Stephen. Always.
Yep.
If he references Lord of the Flies, the game is up.
Yeah, or Lord of the Rings for that matter. Yeah.
Sure. So again, Garrity kind of loses it through the night. We have this beautifully horrifying moment where he looks around and suddenly can't recognize any of the people walking around him. He sees they're just random strangers. He kind of freaks out a little bit. But at last the dawn comes, and with it some hope, I guess. Garrity, he takes stocks again and looks around and sees that most of the boys he knows personally have made it through the night. So small victory is there, I guess.
Yeah, we say most. I don't know that I was even clear on who didn't get.
None of the characters that you probably remember the names of were lost.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And they're kind of talking once again about betting, and we see the character Baker says, "We used to have a pool in my high school. Everybody'd kick in a corner, and then we'd each pick a 3-digit number out of a hat. And the guy holding the number closest to the last mile of the walk, he got the money."
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that's interesting because it's like they didn't say everybody decide on a number that you think is a good estimate. They just
Mm-hmm.
pick numbers out of a hat, which basically totally speaks to this idea of fatalism and just like lack of control. Like society wide internalization of the idea that like it's out of your hands. It's just the outcome of the walk is out of your hands. You can't guess the outcome. Just might as well draw numbers out of a hat. It's entirely a game of chance at that point, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that way, but yeah, that like any other way you would have people like pick your best guess, and then there's a game of skill to it.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's the thing about this is like, we talked about that 100 bullet revolver metaphor I talked about earlier, but like the insidious thing about this walk is everyone participating in it can kind of say to themselves, "Oh, well, this isn't a game of chance. This is like I'm battling my strength against the strength of these other 99 boys." And then the thing that we've kind of realized is that while, yes, fortitude and mental toughness and these things are going to matter as they continue to walk down the road, for so many of these kids, it's just a dice roll. It's like, is your foot going to randomly decide it wants to cramp up today?
Right.
Are you going to trip at the exact wrong time? It's so much of it is out of your control.
Yeah. Exactly. Any number of things that you don't control. In fact, you'd almost say like none of the boys are just like, well, I've decided that I'm done. Like that's it's always something that they wouldn't have seen coming.
Yep.
In advance.
So later in the walk, they're all passing around jokes about the Major when Garrity's closest friend McVrees goes a little nuts here, Matt. He's suddenly screaming at the guards on the half track. We never actually see what triggers him here, Matt. He's talking about he says to the soldiers, "Oh, you think that's funny?" Presumably like they're joking, and maybe one of the guards like laughs or smirks or something, and he caught it, and it just sets him off. I mean, what was your take on this?
I don't know. I'm not sure what set him off exactly. I mean, I think that McVrees has some kind of history where there's something about this, about the situation that set him off, where if we knew what was going on with him, we might be able to guess. But we don't know what his deal is, so we can't guess. I do have to say, like, I love McVrees. McVrees has really grown on me by this point.
Yeah.
I'm going to be really sad when he dies. Weirdly, I like identify with McVrees more than I do with Garrity. I get McVrees in a way that I don't like McVrees feels.
How do you mean?
I just feel like he's similar to the kind of person that I am, and Garrity is not really. Sure. In a way that I don't know that I can even explain further than that. Like McVrees just seems like a kid who I would have gotten along with really well, and Garrity doesn't necessarily. Again, don't know why.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I think that part of it is like, I think there's still a lot we don't know about McVrees, but I feel like Garrity is just this big mystery. I mean, like, we've seen information. We know his father was, non-compliant or whatever, and was taken away by the squads and killed. But we don't actually know how Garrity feels about that, right? Like,
right.
At the beginning of the story, he was very impressed and kind of enamored by the Major, and like talked about how, my dad hated the Major, but he never saw him in person, so he doesn't understand. To the point where we're like, you kind of buy into his full indoctrination, as you've said this week. So there's a little bit where, ironically, being in the head of this guy, we're also kind of removed from him in a way, where I think McVrees is not entirely an open book, but he's kind of driven a lot of the philosophical conversation that's happened between these two characters. And so maybe you just have a better grip on him.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that there's a wound, there's a core wound with Garrity that's actually making it difficult to fully connect, because until that wound is healed, we won't really know who he is. I mean, I'm going to say, tell me if you disagree, but I think that Garrity has quite literally forgotten the phase of his father. Um, he's
Mm-hmm.
he is acting in a way that's completely at odds to the way his father chose to live his life. His father, we don't know the details, but it seems like his father literally gave up his life out of, um, you know, a spirit of rebellion and
Yeah.
independence, and um, maybe not as dramatically as that sounds, but he was killed for not towing the line, and Garrity has rejected that, and he's going to be the best line tower that you ever saw,
Yeah.
and that to me is a mistake that he needs to rectify. Like that's a
Yeah.
character flaw for this character.
No, I like that. The idea that maybe just doing the walk then is specific to demonstrating your uh you know existence in the system and
Yeah,
reverence of the system.
yeah, yeah. Just to be as opposite of his father as possible, basically.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. So he goes to fight them. And this is where I kind of wanted to stop and talk about these soldiers a bit, Matt, because they're these men. They've been there the whole time. They're just impassively handing out warning after warning and then shooting teenage children in the head. Like it makes you wonder, like who are these people? Like how did they get this assignment? And like how do they feel about it, honestly? Are they happy about it? Like they're just so stone faced the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we never see any of them break or even show the slightest sign of hesitation about it.
Yeah,
So,
no.
I mean, you could even view this as yet another part of this sort of state-sanctioned terrorism, where in this case, it's like you make your soldiers do this kind of thing, and maybe if any of them were to hesitate, then you would possibly kill them, right? And so you create this system of um, buy-in and mercilessness and psychopathy. You cultivate your hardened core of completely loyal psycho killers, which is useful to have for other reasons. But maybe these guys are kind of doing their tryouts to join the squads. Maybe that's a little bit too pat, but hey, you prove your ultimate loyalty by being willing to shoot these kids in the head, while showing no emotion, and then we know we can trust you. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that could be. Yeah. I like it. I mean, I hate it, but
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that I'm like overthinking it, and it's just like everyone in the society is so dehumanized at this point that they don't even care. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they could just be perfectly representative of the complete lack of humanity that society has drilled out of them. That
yeah,
they actually have no emotions towards this whole thing. They don't care.
Yeah, it's possible because like they just thoroughly otherized these boys.
Yeah,
it's possible.
So McVrees quickly picks up his third and final warning, and our musketeer Garrity picks up 3 of his own, trying to get McVrees back on the road. He's eventually successful, but McVrees is still beside himself. This is when he starts saying the things we talked about earlier. There is no prize, no money, no winner. Everybody loses. Everybody.
Yeah, I mean, hard to tell whether McVrees really like literally believes this or whether it's more of a metaphorical. Like even if you win, you lose because your body and mind are ruined. In either case, I think the author is planting the idea in our head that like there is no real victory. There's no real winning.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. We starting to get this idea that like over and over again that even if our main character ends up being the one that makes it to the quote unquote finish line, like that's not something we're going to be celebrating as we close the book.
Yeah, right.
So I do love, we have to talk about Stebbins again here, man. I love his kind of reaction to McVrees. He sees him like, hey, your buddy seems to really hate the major. And he's like, well, the major's coming and everyone will cheer. He smiled and his smile was oddly lizard-like. They don't really hate him. Not yet. They just think they do. They think they've been through hell. But wait until tonight. Wait until tomorrow. I love it, man. I love it.
Yeah. Stebbins is great because he definitely seems to have put the most thought into this out of everyone, and seems to have the most accurate sort of philosophical take of the
Yeah.
walk and what it's about. And uh, I'm fascinated by his character.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because you're totally right. He seems to understand, and the only clue we have of this is the fact that we see he witnessed the end of a walk once a few years ago. But he seems to have a really good grasp on what this is and the stakes and the most likely result. But then when Garrity asks him, "Is like, you think you're going to win this thing, don't you?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm quite sure that I will actually." Like, where does that come from? He knows the score. He knows what this is, and yet this, in spite of all that, he's pretty convinced that no, yeah, I'm gonna win.
I mean, this is an ass pull right here, but like maybe his definition of win is something other than survive. I don't know. Um, like
Possible, yeah.
for him, uh, like why in God's name would he join in the first place? Really, like if he knew that that was what the ending looked like, and he knew that
Yeah.
even if you win, your feet, your body and your mind are going to be broken like that. Like,
Mm-hmm,
why
mm-hmm.
would you? Why would you elect to do that? We don't have a single good answer really from any character.
Nope.
Like, no
Nope.
character has given us like, here's a clear and concise reason. I need I would even accept like, well, I need money from old Pappy. My sister. Something hackneyed like that at least would be an answer. But we kind of got nothing unless I'm forgetting something.
No, you're right, and it's to the point where that feels intentional, right? Like
Mhm.
that would be a very easy scene to say, like, the characters have already talked a couple times about why they're here and what they're
Mhm.
doing for it. It would be very easy for one person to walk in and be like, well, honestly, I just really want the money. I need the money.
Mhm.
My family needs the money. Um, no one has said that. No one.
Yeah, it's fascinating because
Yeah.
it has to be about more than money, because it's like the odds of success are so incredibly low, right? It'd be one
Hmm.
thing if there was like a 1 in 5 shot. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
you know, no, it's 1 in 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something I wanted to talk about here that I didn't put in the notes, but I just recall, like, and I thought it's worth mentioning here. There's been several times throughout the book so far where, like, Garrity is talking about something or engaged in a conversation about something, or something's going on, and Garrity hears a person say something, doesn't know who said it, but thinks it comes from Stebbins. And then he looks back, and like Stebbins is just once again kind of impassively, just head down, hunched
Mhm.
over, walking forward, not looking at anything. And like we're led to believe that that is Stebbins saying those things. Like I think the first instance of it is like someone saying "fuck the major," right? And he
Mhm.
thinks it's Stebbins, but we don't have confirmation of that. Just wanted to throw that out there as something to keep track of.
Yeah, I mean, my possibly overly trope sensitive brain thinks that maybe it's actually Garrity saying these things and not realizing it.
Hmm.
Um, but it could just as easily be some other kid, right? Just
Sure.
so, yeah.
So there's another moment here that I think is worth talking about, where Garrity gets into a fight with a boy named Parker, who is basically talking shit about Maine and how much better his little town in Illinois is. This is again like classic teenage stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I have no desire as a 38-year-old man to like defend my hometown. I like it, but like I don't care if you don't like it. But like this is the kind of ticky tacky shit that kids will get really pissed off at each other about.
Totally. I mean, I was in Boy Scouts for a number of years. I only ever saw one physical fight the entire time I was in Boy Scouts, and it was two kids from two different towns having an argument about whose town was better, or some stupid shit like that. I don't even remember the details. I just remember it was like that exact kind of like stupid rivalry. There's no point to it.
And
So
it especially becomes stupid when you consider the situation, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I think again, this,
yeah,
the really the drum we've hit all evening is like, despite the situation, these kids continue to act like just human kids. Like
yeah.
that's just like the indomitable spirit of mankind, even in a life or death situation, will continue to just act the way people typically act.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I again, like, even if at some point they all begin to break down and act like animals, you can still say, like, well, look at how long that took.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's still a statement of like faith in the goodness of humankind, that they
Sure.
didn't just break immediately.
Yeah. I appreciate your trying to find the optimism in this, for sure.
Honestly, I was expecting it to be much more cynical, because you hear Bachman, he's so dark and mean, and it's all so just cruel and cynical. And it's like, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm sure all these kids are going to die horribly, and it's just going to rip our guts out with the tragedy of it. But like, the there's the undeniable beauty of the fact that they're just like trying to be good kids. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the part that you can't pretend that's not in there.
No, I totally appreciate that, and I can't say that I've ever like directly thought about it that way. I mean, I look at this book as incredibly like dour and dark for sure, but I love that you've picked up on that, because I think you're absolutely right.
I think it would be intolerably dark if that weren't in there also. Like, it would just be
Sure.
like what, like there's nothing here to attach to, you know. Um so
Yeah. And then, Matt, as we approach the end of the chapter, Harkness, the would-be author that is going to write a book about this whole experience, starts complaining of a cramp, and he picks up 3 warnings pretty quickly, while also at the same time losing a shoe. Or do you have a cramp, or do you have something as a rock in a shoe or
I
something?
think, man, you know, it kind of blurs together. I think he might have
Yeah.
had a rock in his shoe.
Yeah. And then, so the end of the chapter, we do this thing that I just loved. So I love this writing so much. So he's picked up his 3 warnings. He's struggling and limping and trying to keep up. And then we see this. The guns came back down. It was some sort of dance movement, like a ritual. Harkness rode the edge. Read any good books, lady? Garrity thought insanely. This time they're going to shoot you. Just one step too slow. Eternity. Everything froze. Then the guns went back up to high port. The kind of the descriptive dance of the guns coming up and down, and the not knowing, the power of that not knowing when it was going to happen, if it was going to happen. It's just awful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the torture of the guns coming up and down. I barely care at all about this character, really. I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
not one of the like central ones, but you still feel huge empathy for him, as it's just so easy to put yourself in this position of like
Yeah.
totally outside of your control, that your shoe had a rock in it or whatever. You're just doing your best. You're like, you know, there's this real sense of like, it's not fair. Like, just let me take the rock out of my shoe. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And like, no, there's
I'll
no
walk.
exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And this whole thing is so insidious. And the thing that I think is the most evil part of it is you don't get to know how fast you're walking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, think of how different this would be if every single one of these kids was equipped with a GPS watch that tracked your speed. Like all of our people participating in the long listen, where they're listening to this and then, you know, trying to keep up the speed as they're listening to the book. Like, they have a smartphone or a smartwatch or something that is tracking their pace constantly. And so they can adjust their pace as needed as they feel like it. You know, when I ran my marathon, I ran with a pace group. There was a guy with a flag that said 10-minute mile on it. And I just had to say, okay, that's my guy. And I'm just going to run next to this guy, and I will know that my pace will roughly remain this amount. The only thing these kids are allowed to know is when they drop under 4 miles per hour. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't know when they're walking 7. They don't know when they're walking 5. That's it. And that is, it would be so different if they had access to that. It would be
Mm-hmm.
so different because you could actually strategize, right? Like, just the idea of the vanguard, right? Like, so there was a vanguard of kids that was walking faster and was well in front of everyone else. And then at some point in this week's reading, we're told that most of the vanguard has fallen back. But you can't fall back. Like, they can't actually fall back. What that means is that the people in the back caught up to them, right?
Yeah.
Which means they were walking faster than 4 miles an hour. Like, if you're walking 7 miles an hour and I'm walking 4 miles an hour, you will get further away from me.
Mm-hmm.
If you then slow down to 4 miles an hour, if we're both walking the same speed, I will never catch up to you. I have to be walking faster to catch up to you.
Right.
So there's no real falling back in here. It's me catching up to you. So like, you're wasting energy walking too fast, and you can't even know it.
Thanks you for mentioning this, because it occurred to me at a certain point to be like, how do we even know that the speeds are what they say they are? Like, these guys could just be noting kids who seem to be slowing down and being like, warning number 32. And it's like, I can't argue with you. I don't know how fast I'm walking. For that matter, how does all they have is a half track and a stopwatch. Like, are they looking at the speedometer of the half track? Like, how accurate is that, right?
I believe what we're told, like, I think there's lip service given to like a bunch of like antennas and dishes on the thing that's following them, that is supposed to be the thing that's tracking all of their movement speeds. But
that's true. That's true. They could still be just, those could just be, turned off, and they could still be making it.
It could be bullshit. It could all be an illusion. It's just who we feel like. Yeah.
I don't know. I like the thought that it is just all psychological warfare, and there's no objectivity to it at all.
Yeah. I like that a lot too. God. All right. So our chapter ends with Harkness, who has recovered, and he's now out in front of the entire group. He's walking way too fast, but he's alive for now.
Yep. It's torture.
And that is the end of this week's reading. Oh my gosh, Matt. It is kind of wild to think of, like, the characters are in the state that they're in right now. Like, Olsen is not doing well. McVries is not doing well. Garrity is not doing well. We still got like 200 pages of book left, man.
Yeah. And just for the record, my prediction is that, like, we do not get one of those plots where it's like suddenly, they escape from the long walk, and it's a guerrilla fight or something, and like heroic. It's like, no, I think we're going to play this out. I think we're going to play this whole thing out to the bitter end.
Oh boy. Well, we will find out next week as we continue our coverage of The Long Walk. We'll be reading chapters 7, 8, and 9 next week. Not quite as many pages as this week, but still much more than the first week. So don't you worry. I said that, and then, like, I think someone commented, like, oh, Scott joking around about how it's going to be a much longer read when people are trying to walk while listening to it.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
All right, Matt, let's move into our discussion questions section. Last week, we asked you folks, what is your favorite dystopian contest story? And I think we specified, you don't have to, but try to think off the beaten track a little bit here. And Matt, we got a lot of really cool answers.
Yeah. So T in Hypocrisy picked, they say, my pick is 15 Million Merits from the anthology series Black Mirror. In a world where everything, even a squirt of toothpaste on your toothbrush, is controlled, commodified, and monetized, people toil away day in and day out on exercise bikes to earn merits. These merits pay for all basic living commodities and digital tchotchkes, but mostly pay for entertainment on the ubiquitous screen surrounding everyone to keep them comfortably numb. As an incentive out of this life, a person can work hard to earn 15 million merits to buy a chance to compete in the hotshot talent competition and become a star on one of the entertainment channels being piped back to the bike riders. The story follows Bing, who falls in love with a fellow bike rider, Abby, and gives her his 15 million merits in order for her to enter the contest as a singer. And then they basically, things don't go the way Bing hoped. Yeah, I love that. That's a good example.
I have that's one of those stories that has effect. Like, I will never forget the experience of watching that for the first time.
Yeah.
And just, again, I think no spoilers. It's one of those ones that I'm like, yes, please watch this if you haven't. Black Mirror is coming back, Matt. Did you hear that? There's a new season coming out soon.
Didn't know that. Didn't know that. But yeah, it's like a classic sci-fi short story type premise. It's great.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It's awful.
Yeah.
Uh, Ionosaurus or Lonosaurus or whatever we decided it was last time also picked a Black Mirror episode. This one is White Bear, and they say spoiler warning for people who haven't watched it. A woman named Victoria wakes up in a housing estate and finds herself chased by masked men. There are bystanders around who don't communicate with her and just film her on their phones. She's chased and terrorized with no clue about what's happening, only to find out at the end that she's a convicted criminal in a game show, and every day her memory is wiped and the game resets. The show sets us up to be sympathetic to Victoria until we find out what she did. If anyone hasn't watched the show, I assure you to get right on it. Oh, and Scott, you were right with your last pronunciation of my username the other week. It's Ionosaurus or Ionosaurus. There we go. Confirmation.
Great. Well, now we'll definitely remember that forever.
Except I don't remember which one was my pronunciation from the week before, so I don't remember.
I don't either. Gerardo says, I really enjoyed the 100 TV series. It starts off post-nuclear apocalypse on a space station orbiting Earth, and the last humans are running out of resources, so they send a group down to see if the land is habitable again. They find that there are humans that survived on the ground and the resources are limited, and it being human nature, there are split factions competing for them. Alliances form, break, split, people are betrayed, others have ulterior motives, an action-packed and exciting drama series. So it sounds like an unapproved adaptation of Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves. But it sounds fun. Didn't you watch this?
I did. Yeah. I did not finish it. I watched the first 3 seasons or so, and then I kind of fell off. I enjoyed it. It's a CW show. So if you aren't into that kind of story, you might fall out. But I kind of fell in love with it because like I felt like in the first season at least, the show was really willing to go there, and there is like extreme violence and death, and like it's just constantly surprising. It's like it's on the CW and it's like a teen show, so you think it's going to be something that's not, and then it's like, oh, we're committing to the bit here, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Cool. Yeah, I think I heard you say good things back then. So. Mm-hmm.
Next, we have Pear Jane, who says, the world of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory is so dystopian that an enslaving chocolatier can essentially shut the world down just by inviting folks to his factory. In this world, folks will pause manufacturing to open candy bars. They trade their husband's safety for one more case of Wonka bars, and even the AI hordes of the secret where the golden ticket's location. It's random and it's not. How else can we explain only children winning the tickets? And once the children enter, they're flung into a world of terrifying wonder where their worst traits pick them off one by one. And in the book, most of them are permanently maimed. Willy Wonka designed the tour knowing that the children wouldn't make it through, and that the one left would be the inheritor of his great legacy. They enter the contest and not knowing it's a contest, win a prize they never wanted. And while we assume Charlie's family at least gets to escape the hovel to live in splendor with full-time servants, we never actually find out what Charlie thinks of all this beyond, yay, not poor anymore. After all, he's about to spend the next 10 years of his life learning the secrets of candy making, how to run a factory and a business, how to manage a staff of enslaved people, and all decided for him at the age of 10. He won because he's kind, humble, and obedient. But what will become of him when he becomes the protege of Wonka? At what point will Charlie become a hermit and close his doors?
This is I love this. I love the cynicism of there is something intrinsically dark about all Roald Dahl books that sort of makes you ask these questions. I agree. You're not off base. It's not that ridiculous to be asking this.
No, certainly not.
This reminds me, I was watching a new episode of The Simpsons the other day, and like there's this very serious German business magnate character in the episode, and it's like played very straight, and then like toward the end of the episode it's like revealed that this is Augustus Gloop. Like that's who he is. He's like literally the character from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in The Simpsons. It's like it was hilarious because it's so unexpected. You're like, okay.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's a newer one. It's not one that I would.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, anyway. great answer. Cyan Cicada says, my favorite dystopian contest comes from the 2003 PS2 game Manhunt. You play as a condemned murderer who gets his execution waived in exchange for participating in a fucked up game show that involves killing your way out of a several sound stages inhabited exclusively by ridiculously themed gangs and murderers. The thing that separates Manhunt from other versions of this story is the interactive element. The game show, and therefore the video game, incentivizes ultra-violence. So it's not uncommon to have a thought like, okay, I got to hold the button down longer so I can stab this dude in the face with that glass shard and earn max points. Nice.
That's wonderful. I've never played that game.
Yeah, me neither. Never even heard of
it. Don Zest or Zesty says, going with the paintball episode in the first season of one of my favorite shows, Community. For those who don't celebrate, it's a show that started out as a group of misfits who meet at community college. Before long, it became a unique commentary on pop culture through movie quotes, exploring cliche tropes and animated episodes. Some hit better than others, but it was one of my favorites. In this episode, the school hosts a paintball competition in which the winner gets first pick of courses the next semester. After just 45 minutes, school society collapses into chaos, resulting in student alliances, backstabbing, and overstuffed references to Die Hard, Predator, The Matrix, and Battle Royale. Truly unique for a show that we thought was going to be another sitcom. Yeah, I love Community, of course, and the paintball episode was like just the first moment where the show like fully allowed itself to go absurd to a point where you're like, oh, this is great, actually.
Yeah.
And the Russos were the directors of it, so this is where they got their Marvel chops from. That's great stuff.
That's hilarious. That's great.
And Eagle Eye listeners will realize that when I was talking about the capital P prize earlier in the episode, and I said the prize, that was me quoting from this Community episode.
Excellent. Yeah, I've never actually seen this episode, by the way, but I do like Community. I've seen a bunch of episodes.
How have you seen a bunch of episodes of Community and not seen the paintball episode?
I don't know. It's an oversight. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You need to fix this immediately.
Well, all right. I will immediately. Rear Admiral Bottom says, I got the shit kicked out of me. The fictional game show. Sorry, it was, S hash star, whatever.
Just say shit.
Okay. The fictional game show from the dystopian world of the film Sorry to Bother You. The title is self-explanatory. As Danny Glover's character says, I personally love seeing a motherfucker get beat down and humiliated. Makes me feel warm inside. He's even got the t-shirt.
Did you ever see this movie? This is Boots Riley.
No, I did not.
It's so wonderfully weird. I really enjoyed this movie.
I had no idea what the premise of the movie was until this exact moment of seeing this discussion question answer. So sounds good.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of wonderfully done metaphor and just angry, like very very angry critique of our society. That's just a lot of fun actually to watch as well.
Cool.
Very very good movie. Lord of Chain says, you asked for some examples off the beaten path, and I've got one. My favorite dystopian contest story is a book series I read many years ago when I was 10 or 11. This was way back in the days where Fergie's Glamorous was playing on the radio constantly. A quick Google search shows that both the song and the book came out in 2006. So for no other reason than that, I think of these books whenever the song plays. That book series is Avatars. The first book is subtitled So This Is How It Ends. In the first book, a group of five random teenagers from all over the globe are living their normal lives when, in an instant, they find themselves transported to an apocalyptic future in which the rest of the book takes place. They are drawn together by mysterious forces leading them all to New York City. Where else? Where they are forced to compete in a contest upon whose result the fate of the world will be decided. This book series captured my young imagination and sticks with me to this day, though I don't remember many of the details and I had to look up the plot summary to write this. Maybe I'll pick it up at the library soon and fall in love with it again.
Cool.
I've never heard of that series, but I think it is pretty remarkable just how like pervasive this type of storytelling is, right? Like we've got a couple more answers, but I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Matt, is just like, why do we find these kind of stories so compelling? Like, not only doing dystopian fiction, but doing dystopian fiction in which people are kind of forced into contests, is something I feel like we write about a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very much related to the nature of the long walk. Actually, is that you have people who are put at odds, who should sort of by all rights be at each other's throats,
Mm-hmm.
and they tend the drama of these sorts of stories tends to be that like people still manage to form friendships and even love within these groups of contestants. Like that's the typical trope, right? Is like
Mm-hmm.
you take the teenagers and you say only one of you can survive, and then like they fall in love with each other. Like the
Mm-hmm.
like it's really a sort of a triumphant statement about human nature. This is what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I think it is a great way to critique on our society by putting people in games that people cheer on, and also like the inherent competitive nature of humanity, like you said. um just the like the idea of the state or the individuals in power pitting the populace against each other,
Mhm.
as a form of control, I think is very relatable, because I don't, it's one of those things that like has happened all throughout history, but like it's one of those things that you wonder if it happens naturally, or like sometimes we assign intent to actors, for
Yeah.
methods of control, when it's really just like the behavior mechanisms of people that like,
Hmm.
like I didn't set out to pit these two groups against each other in order to maintain power, but that's like how it plays out. You know what I mean?
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not like they invented American football as a method of control. It's like no, people just like watching football, and it also
Right.
happens to be that like it's a big distraction, which is probably convenient
Mm-hmm.
in some sense. But like it's again not like politicians are like, yes, we must make sure that the NFL season is particularly entrancing this year to distract them from our schemes.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not like when I play Civilization and build a coliseum specifically to stop people from rioting.
right. Yeah. I mean, for all we know,
I
maybe
mean,
it is.
maybe it was. Yeah. I mean, that's, you read history and you tend to see how things play out, and you're like, oh, well, they intended to make that decision to do that. And then sometimes it's like, well, not necessarily. It's just the
Yeah.
way it kind of happened. Or like there's, I mean, maybe there is, but there's not always like a cabal of people like making all choices. There's just a bunch of individual choices that collate into something.
Yes, yes. And also I think these sorts of contests are a way to exaggerate whatever is unfair or broken about your system. You
Yeah. Yeah.
take it, you turn it into a sci-fi thing. Yeah.
I mean, it is absolutely true that like, you look at the history of the United States, and like you look at the ways that like the like Italian Americans were considered a minority, when they first came here. Irish Americans were considered a minority when they first came here, and then the Italians came here, and it's like, oh, you're white now because
Uh-huh.
because you're part of our in group now because we have these other people we don't like, and so the pitting of peoples against each other, for the benefit of the state, is just a thing that
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah. Always has been. Yep.
All right.
All right.
Probably a little premature to talk about this because we still have two
That's
questions
okay.
to read, but let's go ahead.
Steve Living Room says, I love how it seems King created the dystopia created the dystopia genre without it even being called that yet. The Long Walk is the best I've read. It's just so sad, good, well written, and believable in an unbelievable way, if that makes sense. The Running Man is a great book, very well done, and a lot of the same feels for the character. Same with The Hunger Games, but The Long Walk has haunted me since I read it. It's the best. Crazy how he wrote it as a freshman in college. Yeah, cool. I mean, I love this book too. I guess I haven't harped on that enough, but I'm like, this is like one of my favorite Stephen King books so far, at least.
I knew it would be. I really did. I knew you were gonna love this. And yeah, like I think I've said this before, but I'll go ahead and say it again, that like I hadn't read this until I did my big chronological order read, starting a few years ago. And this is one I picked up not knowing anything about it, and I was just like, holy shit. Like, how had I never heard about this book? And it blew me away, and it's stuck with me since then.
Awesome.
All right, we have TN Bugdoc, who is last but not least, who says, I have to go old school with this and say The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. A short but terrific read, worth 10 minutes if you haven't read it yet. I hope they still make high schoolers read stories like this one. I love the way The Lottery starts with a sense of joy and elation, with great visuals of a warm June day in a farm country. The only hint is for you to wonder what the deal with the little boys gathering stones. Like The Long Walk, everyone knows what is going to happen, that they might get their ticket this time. We get the reason for the lottery vaguely, with the saying, lottery in June, corn be heavy soon, and the final couple paragraphs unfold, and the winner gets the prize. The meaning of the gathered stones becomes all too clear.
Yeah. That makes me worried about how this book is going to end. but yeah. Great. I think that was, something that was on King's mind when he wrote this book.
Yep.
So
Definitely. All right, Matt, what is our discussion question for our listeners for next week's episode?
What is your favorite example of naturalistic writing, such as what we talked about this week in reference to the way the prose was styled in this book?
Yeah. I mean, feel free to interpret that any way you want, but I think we're specifically kind of referring to the way King is writing this story.
Yeah, and there's other books I can think of that have kind of a vibe like this. So
yeah.
Go crazy.
All right, folks, that is it for us this week. As we said, next week we will continue with The Long Walk with chapters 7, 8, and 9. That will be episode 3 of our 6-part episode on series on this. So we're almost halfway, Matt, already.
Yeah, awesome. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, over on the subreddit r/Doof Media.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do so. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere in the world that podcasts are these days. They're everywhere. We're everywhere. Subscribe to us now.
They're in the air. If you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks to new patrons this week, Nikki and Lord Clampton. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff over there, such as our recent discussion of the stellar film Maximum Overdrive, written and directed by Stephen King.
We got some great feedback on that one, so I'm glad our listeners enjoyed that one as much as we did.
Awesome.
Of course, if you cannot afford to contribute, that is absolutely okay. You can help out by sharing this podcast and by leaving us a rating and a review. You folks answered the call, and so we have a spotlight review this week from user McCamek, who gives us 5 stars and says, a great accompaniment. I've been reading these books in order again, and this has been a tremendously beneficial source of additional information that is relevant to the source material. I recommend reading the books first, then listening to this after finishing each book to make sure you get all the details you may have missed. Yeah, that's a way to do it for sure.
Yeah. Sounds good.
When I do these, so I mean, obviously I like these kind of read along podcasts. That's why I made one with you. I listen to other ones as well. And I try really, really hard to keep up and read each week the reading that they're talking about. But sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, it's good of you to try.
Yeah. That's all that matters.
Trying is all that matters. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, folks, that is it. We are finally done. We will see you back here next week for some more walking, long days, and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.